here this morning. Let me start by saying that I want to welcome everybody to the University of North Carolina at Pembroke's 7th Annual Human Trafficking Conference. I logged on a few minutes ago and heard Dr. Paparazzi already speaking to us about an app we can download. I've already learned so much just in the initial minutes of this conference. I imagine there will be so much coming forward for all of us today. Both a combination of serious and challenging conversations and discussions and information we need to know, but at the same time, filled with promise and hope for the future as we look at ways that we can change the world in which we live. So I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here. I understand that there are already well over 360 people registered for this conference today. And that's part of what gives me hope, right, for the future, that so many people are concerned and involved. And I want to thank all of you for your sincere interest in learning about this terrible crime. As a university community, we take prevention of the crime of human trafficking very seriously, and we know traffickers target our youth especially. So this is a wonderful opportunity for our students to learn about this crime and to take that knowledge into their careers, into their families, into their communities, and help us to protect all of the vulnerable in our society. And I'm sure many of you have seen the movie Sound and Freedom, and after seeing the movie, you've asked yourselves, what can I do, right? How can I be part of the solution? The conference this year will highlight what many of our speakers are doing to fight against this crime and help those who have survived this crime and then prevent future victimization. And that's one of the reasons that this conference is so important. It's not just about understanding the crime, but about what we can all do. This year's presenters represent an amazing array of experts. I'm so impressed by the individuals and the backgrounds of the folks who are going to be here today. And I know that you will be too, from various non-governmental organizations who've devoted all of their time and talents to preventing this crime. Our keynote this year is Bill Wolf, who has spoken at all 7 of our annual conferences. He's just such an impressive person. He's the 2018 recipient of the Presidential Award for Extraordinary Efforts to Combat Trafficking in Persons, the founder of Anti-Trafficking International, the former director of human trafficking programs at the Department of Justice, as well as a special advisor to the White House on trafficking. That's an amazing resume of activities. Also from Anti-Trafficking International, which is a leader in preventing human trafficking in communities across the globe, we are pleased to have its current executive director, Aaron Fisher, a lawyer and academician, and Susan Young, for her second time speaking at UNCP, the executive director for the Parent Coalition to End Human Trafficking. Susan and her family members are surviving victims of trafficking. We're also happy to welcome Father Jeffrey Behe, a priest and author from Louisiana, who founded Metatonia Manor, an NGO helping adolescent girls who have been trafficked. We also have Kevin Wells, Director of Public Relations for World Villages for Children, whose nuns service 20,000 children around the world, keeping these children safe from being trafficked. We are honored to have Seth Brooks, a UNCP graduate and a veteran of the US Army who was inspired to use his skills to combat human trafficking and started his nonprofit Project Lost Sheep in 2022. We also have a recent UNC Chapel Hill graduate, Michael Bright, who has co-authored an incredible report which analyzed North Carolina's response to preventing trafficking. And finally, our last speaker is Jennifer Musu-Mechi. Sorry, I've been working on that pronunciation and I appreciate the help with that. I hope I didn't do too badly at that. Jennifer is another alumnus from UNCP who is a subject matter expert in this field and who will begin UNCP's Master in Social Work program this fall. She works as a co-leader of the Street Grace Survivor Advisory Council. Again, just an amazing array of experts in this field, and I'm so grateful that they are joining us today. Since 2015, this conference has brought a wide variety of experts to our university to keep our students and the public aware of the dangers of human trafficking. Our school has been honored to hear from experts from Congress, from state legislators, local legislators, law enforcement agencies, including the FBI and Homeland Security, sheriff's offices, local police departments, North Carolina Bureau of Investigation, members of non-governmental organizations who work to support and aid the survivors, members of academia, members of the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission, the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking, tribal leaders from across the country, most importantly, survivors of human trafficking whose contribution to fighting this crime has been the greatest resource for all. We would like to recognize those who work every year to offer this conference, including our chancellor, who could not be here this morning, Dr. Robin Cummings, who sends his best to all of you and thanks you for being here. Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Dr. Ashley Allen. Chair of the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice, Dr. John Porter Lillis. Administrative Support Associate, Shannon Maynor. Director of Creative Services, Courtney Powers Walters. And Technology Support Specialist, James Lewis, and the Do It staff. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the individual who has done so much work on this conference year after year. The amazing work of Dr. Paparozzi, a longtime and much respected faculty member in the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice at UNCP. Dr. Paparozzi's commitment to the prevention of human trafficking is exercised in so many ways, but perhaps most importantly in the work she does to organize this conference. Out in the public these days, there's a lot of negative opinions floating around about higher education and what our role is in the world. Activities like this conference and the work of folks like Dr. Paparozzi remind us of all that is great and powerful in the field of education and in higher education. The work that she has done and her colleagues have done and all of you have done year after year to educate folks, to bring them into the fold to understand this horrible crime and to help our students understand how they can contribute and make a difference in this world is what higher education is all about. So I thank her, of course, for all of this work today and all of you for being here. And welcome to UNCP. We're honored to have you here.
Thank you, Dr. Prusenko. It's so nice to get to meet you finally. Dr. Prusenko has just started as our provost, and we're so happy to have you here. And I would like to welcome you all, as Dr. Prusenko has just done. As she said, my name is Judy Paparozzi, and I've been an adjunct professor of law and criminal justice at Pembroke since I think it was 2007, 17 years. And I've been teaching human trafficking for the last 10 years. And it was one of my students that actually suggested that I do a conference. And it's a lot of work, but honestly, it's been life-changing for me, and I hope it's been life-changing for others who have attended our conferences. So this is our third virtual conference, and I do this so I can reach out, like there are people from India here, Pennsylvania, Delaware, so I can reach out as far as we can to work on the preventative end of human trafficking. And as Dr. Prusenko said, we have, I think it was the last count, it was almost 370, so I'm so thrilled that so many of you are passionate enough to take the time to listen to us today. Because since Sound of Freedom was released last summer, that's the question I'm asked every time I give a talk. My friends, my family, what can I do to end human trafficking? So I turn to the experts and want to know what we can do all to answer this question. So I just want to do the dedication. I'm going to share the screen again. And I do have to get in touch with Father Behe. He was not able to get on. He doesn't have the link. So I'll have to send that to him in a second. So I'll just finish this up and I'll get to Father Behe in 1 second. So what can we all do? Sorry, did something wrong. What we can all do to, first of all, we're starting with Barbara and Maya. I'm sorry. When I got that text, I got nervous. Sorry, here it is. So I'm just not going to, I'm just going to leave this up for a second. So I just want you to see a beautiful picture of Barbara Amaya. Barbara spoke at our conference in 2022. She died this past January, and the world lost one of its greatest advocates for the victims and survivors of human trafficking everywhere. Barbara bravely shared her own traumatic experiences being trafficked both as an adolescent and as a young woman for, I think, 10 to 12 years. And she dedicated the rest of her life, I think she was 66 or 67 when she died, the rest of her life to raising awareness of this crime and used her platform at Anti-Trafficking International to shed light on the complex issues that human trafficking victims experience. The professionals are not survivors. These are our greatest teachers, the survivors. They teach us so much about this crime that we wouldn't be able to figure out. And I have 31 years in criminal justice. Bill Wolf was a cop for 15 years. We learned the best from survivors, and Barbara was one of the best survivor teachers to us. Her obituary had a beautiful, beautiful quote that I'm going to quote. Her career was her soapbox, her pen was her sword, and her wit was her shield. She leaves behind her beautiful daughter, Bianca, and her beautiful grandchildren. She will be missed by us all. So to learn more about Barbara, you see her website on the screen, barbaraamaya.com, which I shared ahead of time. But if you want to learn more about her or read her autobiography, you will learn a lot about trafficking. It's called Nobody's Girl. Father, I'm sorry, I was just getting my intro. I'll do it in a minute. Thank you. Sorry about that. It's Father Bay trying to get in. And again, her website is barbaraamaya.com. So before I begin, Dr. Prusenko already pointed out who our wonderful speakers are. Of course, Bill Wolf is truly one of the leading experts on human trafficking in the country. His executive director is Erin Fisher. I've become great friends with her just since yesterday. Susan Young's speech in 2019 is the most talked about speech of any person who has spoken. My sincere apologies to Bill because he's the best, but no one talked more to me about a speech than they talked about Susan Young. She was just incredible. So that's the people from Anti-Trafficking International. We have NGOs also that help heal people, like Father Beatty, who needs to get online in a second, from Metanoia Manor in Louisiana, and Jennifer Musumeci from Street Grace, based in Georgia, but also here in North Carolina. We have others protecting our youth from trafficking, like our UNCP alumnus. He took my human trafficking class, but he was inspired while in the military to help find human trafficking, working with law enforcement, and then helping them heal. We also have Kevin Wells from World Villages. The work of World Villages is amazing, and it saves so many children. Over 21,000 right now, but I think the numbers Kevin will share with you are in the hundreds of thousands. These kids probably would have been trafficked, but for these great nuns who work with these kids in World Villages, teaching them, housing them, protecting them from human traffickers. And we have an alumnus of UNC Chapel Hill, one of the best universities in the world, Michelle Bright, who will be speaking about her report that she co-authored about what we can do here in North Carolina, what's going on here in North Carolina. Sorry, I'm nervous about getting to Father Beatty. So what can you do to end human trafficking before Bill begins speaking? The first thing you can do is support a non-governmental organization. It's so easy. You have several here today, but there are many, especially the ones that help victims directly. They're the best ones, or prevent trafficking from happening and work on curriculums to bring into schools and churches, etc. So you can support one. Secondly, if you have children or young people in your family, please stay on top of what they're doing online, and especially on their phones. This is the weapon of the traffickers. All these apps on the phone, all the ones that parents are worried about. Please work with your children. Don't take the cell phones away. Partner with them to keep them safe. And secondly, labor trafficking, as I mentioned before we started, labor trafficking, get that Sweat and Toil app. Please look for fair trade, etc. Just one or two more thank yous. There is a church in New Jersey, a church ministry, that invited its parishioners as a group to participate in watching this conference today. So I wanted to say thank you to Robin and her Justice and Peace ministry at St. Rose Parish in New Jersey. They are even serving refreshments, and I didn't even do that. I was so happy to get that text from my sister. And I want to thank Robin so much. And I want to thank my dear sisters who are always here to support me, Joanna, Dell, and Mary, my friends, my dear colleagues at work. How do you put up with me? I don't know how you do it. Dr. Lillis, Dr. Allen, and of course, Shannon Maynor, who is just my anchor, and my students who inspire me to keep fighting this crime. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to get out of here for a second to get Father Behe online, but I would like to now introduce our dean, and who is a great supporter of this annual conference, Dr. Ashley Allen. Welcome, Dr. Allen.
Hi, thank you. So I'm just gonna say a few quick words while you get Father Behe on, so that he can rest easy and be joining us. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Allen. I'm an associate dean in the College of Arts and Sciences at UNCP. For the past few years, I've had the privilege of being part of this vitally important conference on human trafficking. And I want to reiterate what Provost Prusink said, because Judy Paparosi, you impressed me all the time, and I'm so thankful for you, and your dedication and commitment to this work is admirable. I'm thankful that our students at UNCP have the opportunity to not only learn from you, but experience your passion and your dedication to this cause. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for working tirelessly to put this conference together every year. We really, really appreciate that. As noted by Provost Prusink, Bill Wolf is speaking here for a 7th time. In 2015, for our first conference, he was flying his own plane down to Pembroke from Northern Virginia, had issues with his flight, and he called in his talk from an airport somewhere in rural Virginia. So that is true dedication. We're very thankful that he consistently shows up for this conference. So thank you very much for that. Okay, and I know we've thanked our speakers, but I'll just say a couple words about them until Judy gets back. I'm excited to hear from Susan Young again, whose 2019 talk focused on survivors and the work that she's doing to establish programs and services to help victims, parents, and families recover from trafficking. Thank you for that work, and we're excited to hear from you. We're all very, very proud about our 2 UNCP alumni speaking this year as well. Seth Brooks, I haven't met you yet, but I'm really looking forward to your talk today. I've heard a lot about you. So he's a veteran who is inspired to start his own nonprofit to help victims, and that nonprofit's Project Lost Sheep, which we will hear a lot about. And it's great to see that a graduate alumnus, Jennifer Musumeci, I'm doing the same thing as Provost Prusink, but we got this, who earned her certificate in addictions counseling in December of this past year, is returning this fall to begin her master's in social work. So yay, coming back to UNCP, which makes me excited. And then finally, a warm welcome to our new speakers who graciously agreed to speak this year, including Erin Fisher, who works side by side with Bill Wolf, and Susan Young, to make human trafficking prevention education available to everybody worldwide. Is Father Behe on?
I sent him the link, so he'll be on in a minute. I'm just looking for Bill Wolf.
Oh, no, you're fine. So I'm thinking him, but he's not here yet. But he helps adolescent survivors of sex trafficking recover. Kevin Wells from World Villages for Children, and UNCP Chapel Hill graduate Michelle Bright, who will give us an overview of how North Carolina has responded to this crime, which I am very excited to hear about as well. Thank you all for speaking at our university and educating our students and the public on this important topic.
Thank you so much, Dr. Allen. I thank you so much for your support and your kind words too. So welcome to our conference. Our keynote speaker this year is, again, Bill Wolf from the Wolf Group and Anti-Trafficking International, formerly Just Ask Prevention. If there's anybody in this country who has dedicated his life to fighting this crime, it is Bill Wolf. And that, as the provost mentioned, he was recognized and he received the Presidential Medal for extraordinary efforts to combat human trafficking and human persons, I think, in 2018. He continues that, but his career was unbelievable. As a police officer, as actually a sheriff's officer, that's where he began. And later, when he became a gang detective, he like literally bumped into, right, Bill, human trafficking, and he didn't even recognize it at first. And he was told by, I think, a prosecutor, well, this is a case of human trafficking. So as I pointed out to my classes for many years, this wasn't even a crime. We didn't even hear about this for the last 30 or 40 years until about 2000 to 2010, when we finally woke up. He was a federal task officer with the FBI and Homeland Security, where he investigated and prosecuted cases locally and federally. He started a task force of his own in Northern Virginia, co-directed that task force with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Virginia Attorney General's Office. He coordinated efforts with law enforcement and forge partnerships with NGOs like what he would eventually start, and victims. He got input from victims so early on. Under his leadership for this task force alone, they identified 217 victims. This is Northern Virginia, one of the wealthiest areas in the country. 217 victims of both sex and labor trafficking. They recovered 126 of them, and they initiated investigations into more than 100 traffickers. He founded Just Ask Prevention, which is now Anti-Trafficking International, a leader across the world developing education, prevention education, which is so crucial. If we're going to end human trafficking, we have to prevent it to begin with. And he went to the Department of Justice, accepting a position there as the senior executive service in the role of Human Trafficking Program Director, responsible for an enormous budget and grant money for human trafficking programs. But then he was asked to step in as the acting director of the Office for Victims of Crime and served as its principal deputy director, overseeing a $6 billion program for grants. He has now become an author on top of everything else. His new book is called Eradicating Human Trafficking, a Transformative Approach to Collective Impact. And it's truly laid out the most comprehensive blueprint to date in the anti-human trafficking field. And by the way, when he was working as special advisor to the White House that Dr. Prusank mentioned, he oversaw the implementation of the first ever national action plan to end human trafficking. He now serves also as the principal at the Wolf Group. He serves on the board of directors for Northern Virginia Food Rescue Advisory Board for the Prince William County Department of Social Services. He too is an adjunct professor at George Mason University, and he has an amazing family. His wife, Lori, I don't know how she puts up with him. He's always busy, the busiest person I ever met. And he has 6 amazing kids. And did I mention that he's a pilot on top of everything else? Well, I think Dr. Allen mentioned that. He's also a pilot. I don't know what you do in your spare time. I don't think you have any. Welcome to my dear friend of about 10 years now, Bill Wolf. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you so much, Judy, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Allen, and all the staff at UNCP that continue to put on this incredible conference every single year. And Dr. Allen, if it wasn't for being able to make a splash, so at least I'm memorable in one way or another. But it is a true pleasure to be here with all of you. A very good morning. To those all up and down the East Coast and on the West Coast from all over the country that are joining. I want you to imagine for a moment the intricate web of our global community, where every action and decision echoes across lives and borders. This is the realm of something called the butterfly effect, the principle that a single small event or person can initiate a series of consequences far beyond its immediate surroundings. The butterfly effect, a term coined by meteorologist Edward Lorenz, is a pivotal concept in chaos theory that's captivated both the scientific community and the public imagination. Its origins trace back to the 1960s, when Lorenz, in his pursuit to understand and predict weather patterns, discovered that tiny, almost negligible variations in initial conditions could lead to vastly different outcomes in complex systems. This idea was metaphorically described as a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil, potentially causing a tornado in Texas, thus illustrating the profound impact of small events on large, intricate systems. Over time, this concept has transcended meteorology, influencing fields as diverse as economics, ecology, philosophy, and today I submit to you, even the anti-human trafficking movement, where it serves as a powerful metaphor for the interconnectedness of people, actions, and events in our seemingly chaotic attempts to eradicate human trafficking. As has been mentioned, I've been in this space for a really long time. The gray hairs show for that. I don't know if it's from the kids or from working in the anti-trafficking space. But really, when I first got started, none of us knew what to do. This was all very new to us in presenting it. As a police officer, we had never been trained on it. We didn't have task forces and specialized units. And so we really were having to find our way. Now, the United States first recognized human trafficking back in the year 2000 with the Transformative Trafficking Victims Protection Act that was championed by Congressman Chris Smith. Congressman Smith from New Jersey has been an incredible human rights champion across the years. He continues to champion it as the TVPA requires to be reauthorized every couple of years. He continues to push forward. In fact, he just sponsored a reauthorization bill that passed the House almost unanimously. I want you to think about that for a second. A bill that almost passed the House unanimously in today's political culture. It just shows how interconnected this issue of human trafficking is, how it transcends political ideologies, it transcends borders, it transcends everything within our communities. But that is also a reminder to all of us that while it does transcend at those higher levels, it does impact and transcend at our personal level as well. This conference is so rightly named, what can you do to help human trafficking? And I'm so encouraged by that message because human trafficking seems like a massive event. It seems like something so complex and intricate that how can we really have an impact on it? But I submit to you, the same way that a butterfly flapping its wings can cause a tornado, your actions can cause change in the human trafficking movement. Sir Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. If we stand back and do nothing to attack this issue of human trafficking, then it will continue to grow. It's become the second largest criminal enterprise in the world. Our own U.S. Department of State estimates that there is over 26 million people on the face of this planet today that are in modern day slavery and human trafficking. That is a massive number. There are more slaves on the face of our planet today than there have ever been in the history of our planet. And it demands action from each and every one of us. Human trafficking is a very complex issue. There are so many different components to it. And this is why it's not something that we can turn simply to law enforcement to fix, or turn to our legislators in DC or in your state capitals to fix. It really requires what we have traditionally called a grassroots movement. It requires communities to stand up, engage in this fight. If it wasn't for early on heroes like Congressman Chris Smith that really took this issue on, or my dear friend Linda Smith, no relation to Chris Smith, but Linda Smith is the founder and executive director of an organization called Shared Hope International. Now, talking about somebody that can flap wings and cause, just massive change, Linda Smith was one of the only people in the history of our country to win a congressional race. She is the only person in the history of our country to win a congressional race running as an independent as a write-in candidate. She was a write-in candidate and won a seat in Washington State many years ago. That, my friends, is a true testament to dedication and perseverance, right? Really wanting something to happen. In her role, she served one term as a congresswoman, and during that time, she was introduced to human trafficking happening overseas. She was one of the early champions before we had the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, before we had all of these other organizations and fighters that are in the movement trying to bring about change. And her voice, alongside so many other early champions, really brought about the movement as we know it today. They've inspired organizations like Anti-Trafficking International. They've inspired the government to adopt new policies and programs, new legislation. Judy mentioned when I was at the Department of Justice, I oversaw over $100 million budget focused specifically on human trafficking. Now that's slightly ironic because I'm not even allowed to touch the checkbook in my house, and yet the federal government entrusted me with $100 million of your money. But we put it to good use, and we made sure that we were investing in programs that were hitting on what we call the 3P framework. This is the framework that that the United States put into place within the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. This was, it's based off of what we call prevention, prosecution, and protection. We recognize that to truly be effective in this space, to truly be able to eradicate human trafficking, which is our ultimate goal, we have to be able to touch on all three of those. Prevention, I know my colleague Erin Fisher is going to talk a lot more about prevention and education, but it plays a critical role because ultimately that should be our goal, is to stop human trafficking before it starts. We have to implement policies and procedures that get at the root causes of human trafficking, whether that's through education or whether it's through addressing those at-risk factors that leave people vulnerable within our own communities. You see, while we talk about human trafficking being a global issue, which it absolutely is, it's also impacting us right here in our own communities. Whether it's, as Judy mentioned, we're facilitating human trafficking through goods that we're purchasing at the store, or it's situations where it's our own neighbors, it's our own kids that may be targeted by traffickers. In the United States, we recognize both sex and labor trafficking. When we're talking specifically about sex trafficking, we know that the average age that traffickers are targeting potential victims is 14 to 16 years old. Folks, this is young. These are our kids. These are our young people during probably one of the most vulnerable stages of their developmental years. And yet the traffickers know those are those vulnerabilities, and those are the individuals that they are targeting, that they're manipulating and trapping in these exploitive situations. You see, traffickers only look for three things. They look for accessibility, suggestibility, and vulnerability. And I want to take just a second to explain that, because so many people ask that question. Well, who is a potential victim of human trafficking? The reality is trafficking cuts across all races, ethnicities, genders, socioeconomic classes. It does not matter. Traffickers are only looking for who they can get access to, who is suggestible, and who has a vulnerability that they can manipulate. We talk about accessibility. We have seen trafficking grow exponentially over the past decade. And a lot of that is really due to the fact that so many of our young people and even young adults are moving online more and more to communicate. This creates technology as a fantastic tool that is connecting all of us this morning, right? It's giving us the ability, no matter where we are in the world, to be able to connect and to have this conversation. But at the same time, it presents certain threats. It presents a threat to our young people who don't know how to use that technology responsible. It presents a threat from those that are willing to exploit that technology to go after our young and vulnerable individuals in our communities. They can use that technology to scout out and figure out who would make a good victim. They can use that technology to try to manipulate and groom them over a period of time. And this is something that's critically important for us to understand. Because when we talk about what is it that you can do, some of the things that you can do revolve around understanding what are the things that traffickers are using to go after young people, and then putting necessary safeguards in place. When we talk about human trafficking, we really look at it through what we call ecosystem thinking. This is an area where it really is, human trafficking hits on all levels, whether it's the personal level or whether it's us in our professional capacities. You don't have to be in an anti-human trafficking role or position for human trafficking to touch you. If you're in corporate America, maybe you're working on supply chains, right? Or is your company practicing good corporate social responsibility with their supply chains? If you are in an educational role, are you educating young people? If you work for a technology company, is your technology company willing to put necessary safeguards in place to protect young people? There's so many different aspects of our lives that impact human trafficking. So traffickers are getting more and more access to young people, and they're using technology to do it. We've seen an exponential increase over the past several years. In fact, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children estimates that our youth, that 1 in 5 youth will be approached by a trafficker at some point during their developmental years. So just taking that back and applying that personally as a father of 6, that means at least, statistically, at least one of my children will be approached by a trafficker. And we know that the majority of that, more than 80% of those encounters, are going to be online. But yet there's challenges to that, right? The technology companies, Congress has held many hearings in the past several months. They've put forward proposed legislation to hold technology companies accountable and to put necessary safeguards in place. But yet we've failed to take action. And I would challenge you that one of the things that you can do, one of the ways that you can flap your wings, is simply reaching out to your elected officials and letting them know that this is an important issue for you. You see, our elected officials, as much as we joke about politicians, as much as we say, that they don't care, the reality is they do care what their constituents think. Because at the end of the day, you are the ones that will have to vote for them when their term is up. You're their bosses. That's the beauty of the American system, is that they answer to us as constituents, and they need to hear from you. They need to know that this is a priority for you in your community, so that they will take on and tackle these challenges, that they're willing to take on the tech companies that are out there that are, trying to push down this legislation and prevent it from ever being implemented. So each of us plays a critical role in addressing some of these issues. So we talked about accessibility. Suggestibility goes along with what we've already been talking about, and that is where young people it's easier to manipulate them into these situations now. And a lot of that is because of what they're being taught about certain things, like when we talk about sex trafficking, what they're being taught about healthy relationships. The more that they're being inundated with things like TikTok and YouTube and social media, these are influencing how our young people view healthy relationships. They're influencing how they view themselves in relation to the world around them. And it's making it easier for traffickers to be able to target and manipulate them into these situations. And then lastly, vulnerability, right? Again, this is something where each of us as human beings, we all have vulnerabilities. But the more that we move online, the more that we're dependent on social media and online platforms to communicate, the reality is we're seeing people being less guarded with what their vulnerabilities are. And so they're allowing these vulnerabilities to be put out into the world. And as a result, traffickers are leveraging that. Now, these vulnerabilities come from various different places. In fact, we kind of categorize vulnerabilities into 4 main categories. Economic vulnerabilities, which is what most people tend to think of, is those that are impoverished, are in need of money. But the reality is that those make up probably in the United States, those make up the smallest category of vulnerabilities that we see. The more common vulnerabilities that we see in the United States really stem around, those that have experienced prior abuse. We're seeing that more and more, with a particularly notable rise in what we call familial trafficking. This is where we are now learning that young people are being trafficked by their own family members, whether that's a mom, a dad, a foster parent, an aunt, an uncle, a brother, or a sister. But right now, current statistics suggest that more than 40% of sex trafficking cases are a result of familial trafficking, or started with a familial abuse situation. So this is really a call for us to better understand what is causing this, what is causing these young people to be abused in these various different situations, and ensuring that we have safeguards enacted to make sure that they can be protected, but that also when somebody is being abused, that they have a mechanism to get out or to report. Familial trafficking is one of the most difficult types of trafficking to identify, because as you can imagine, the victims, the children, have a particular affection for their traffickers, right? It's either a mom, a dad, it's a family member. And they've also been groomed from a very early age to believe that this is normalized behavior. This is okay. And so it's very difficult for them to understand that this is not, that this is a problem, right? And so that they need to seek help. And we don't really have those mechanisms for help that are in place in a lot of different areas. This is why I'm so proud of Anti-Trafficking International that's working alongside school systems to be able to implement reporting mechanisms. We're working with legislators to better understand where the breakdowns are and how we can be better. In my own jurisdiction, my own county, Prince William County, Virginia, they've implemented two very innovative approaches, in my opinion, with the school systems. One, they have two county-wide human trafficking coordinators that are school employees. So they're working in the schools, they're making sure that they are providing outreach. And then just recently, they are, the school system is hiring new CPS liaisons. So these are individuals that can help bridge the gap between Child Protective Services and what's happening and what's being reported in the schools. This is incredibly important. And I think that we will start to see changes. Now, you'll hear from Susan Young in a little bit, and you'll hear about really how the system broke down in protecting her child. And I think because of Susan and her courageous actions of being able to speak out, share those things that have happened, we are seeing that change, and we're seeing innovation, like I mentioned in my own county, Prince William County.
Great.
We also know that individuals come from situational vulnerabilities, those that are experiencing homelessness, those that come from unstable home environments where they're witnessing domestic violence in the home, or a parent is abusing different substances, physical abuse. All of these things create environments that are ripe for traffickers to take advantage of young people. This is really, again, a call for each of us at that community level to be putting into place those different protections and safeguards so that young people can find outlets. They recognize what's happening and are able to get out of that situation. As I mentioned, familial trafficking is absolutely on the rise. Now, we don't know if we're seeing increased numbers of familial trafficking, or because of the work that's being done to raise awareness around the issue, if we're just seeing an increase in reporting. But regardless, more than 40% of cases are involved in familial trafficking. It's something that I think we really need to be focused on. We really need to be paying attention to. So we talked about prevention being critical. Prosecution is absolutely critical as well, empowering our law enforcement officers to have the tools and resources that they need to be able to effectively combat this. Now, in North Carolina, you all are doing amazing work. Your legislature is really doing some good work. You have a state senator who is a huge champion for human trafficking, Senator Ted Alexander. We've been working very closely with his office, and he has been drafting comprehensive state legislation to respond to human trafficking. Last year, he championed helping get funding to create a specialized unit within the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigations to investigate and respond to human trafficking. You all have the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission. So great work is really being done in North Carolina right now. And it really is becoming a model for other states across the country to have this comprehensive, multidisciplinary response to human trafficking. And then lastly, we talk about protection. Protection is really about providing restorative care services for survivors of human trafficking. Now, we have been kind of piecemealing and triaging this process throughout the years. We're finally getting better. Again, just to brag on North Carolina for a second and the work that's being done down there, there's an incredible organization called Safe House Project based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Safe House Project is another example of a small organization flapping its wings and creating massive change. Started by two incredible women that I have the privilege of walking alongside in some of their work today. Both military wives. The way that they like to tell the story, and I won't do it justice, is both of their husbands were deployed at the time. One had just had a baby and was on maternity leave from her regular job, and they said, what better time than to start a national nonprofit organization? And so they founded this organization. They work to help establish safe homes all across the country in various different ways. But one of the things that I'm so proud of the work that they're doing is they've created a national certification program. This is a program where if you're running a safe home, they will come in and they'll review your programs, they'll review your financial stability, they'll review all the things that make up the comprehensive approach and provide you with a certification. And the reason this is so impactful for me is one of the challenges that I had when I was acting director at the Office of Victims of Crime was we were funding organizations all across the United States, but there was no way to evaluate the effectiveness of those organizations. And every once in a while, we would come across a particular program that really wasn't serving survivors with quality. Sometimes, unfortunately, we would come across programs that were based on their practices were actually re-victimizing or re-traumatizing those survivors. So implementing innovative programs like a national certification program is something that is absolutely vital to the work that we are doing. And I want you just to, again, sort of applying that metaphor of the butterfly effect. Here's two women in a point in their lives when it really doesn't make sense, right? They're just had a baby and husbands are deployed and all these other things. And they said, you know what? We're going to take action. That action that they have taken just a few years ago is turned into a national movement where they literally earlier this week were on Capitol Hill talking to senators, including one of your senators, Senator Tillis, about this certification program and the need for it. Each of us plays such a critical role. And that's why when we wrote this book that Judy mentioned, it really is about a transformative approach to collective impact. I believe that after being in this movement for almost 2 decades, that if we are truly going to change the course of history, if we are truly going to eradicate human trafficking, it will be through a collective impact approach. And what that means is we have got to break down those silos. We have got to work together, and we have got to realize that each and every one of us plays a pivotal role in eradicating human trafficking. Figuring out where it is that you fit into the movement itself. Figuring out what resources you can bring to bear to support other organizations, to raise awareness in your community, or even to be able to advocate for the necessary change. Each of us plays a role. I want you to consider just for a minute Judy Paparosi. The fact that she was able to flap her wings and get almost 400 people here in this conference today is a testament to how the smallest actions can bring about the largest change. She truly is an inspiration, and I hope that you will draw inspiration from her as you leave this conference to really contemplate what is your role. She's leveraging her station in life, her ability to pull a conference off at the incredible UNCP, right? Because she's a professor there, to be able to leverage that, to be able to spread awareness and create impact and change around this issue of human trafficking. Today, as we stand united at this pivotal conference, I hope that our hearts and our minds are aligned with that singular, unwavering purpose to eradicate the scourge of human trafficking that plagues our global society. Inspired by the profound words of Eleanor Roosevelt, the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. I have a dream, much like Dr. King had a dream many years ago. Dr. King's dream, he flapped his wings and brought about a civil rights movement that changed the course of our history. And I hope that we can use that as an example, that we're able to dream of a future without human trafficking, a future where our children and their children can grow up without the threat of being trafficked or exploited. Human trafficking is a very complex issue, and it's evident that no single solution, no single person, no single discipline can stand alone and effectively eradicate it. We must strengthen legal frameworks, foster education and awareness, support survivors of trafficking, and harness technology and innovation to be able to create a tapestry of our collective crusade against human trafficking. I know this conference is dedicated to the memory of Barbara Amaya, a dear friend that I had the privilege of working with for many, many years. And I want to stress to all of you that what's critically important throughout our collective response to human trafficking is that survivor leaders have a meaningful seat at the table. They are the subject matter experts that can really help to drive change. And for so long, many of my colleagues, my friends that are survivors that have not been able to have a voice, they need a voice. And so maybe your role in all of that is just elevating them, making sure that their voice is heard. There are many different strategies that we can acknowledge to combat the challenges that lie ahead. The hidden and manipulative nature of trafficking, the complex legal and jurisdictional hurdles, resource constraints, and ever-evolving tactics of traffickers demand our vigilance, but also our adaptability, our creativity, and our innovation. But we shouldn't be daunted. Instead, this is a call to arms, a charge to embrace the butterfly effect, where each and every small action that you take contributes to the monumental wave of change. There's a Latin saying, si vis pacem para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. My friends, I submit to you that if we want the peace of not having trafficking in our communities, it requires action, dedication, and the courage to confront and overcome the forces of exploitation and injustice in our communities. As we move forward from this conference today, I hope that we will all carry the vision of a world free from the shadows of human trafficking, a world where the morning news speaks of triumphs and resilience, where communities stand vigilant and united, and where survivors find hope and healing. This is not a distant dream, but a future within our grasp, if we dare to believe in the beauty of those dreams and the power of our collective action. I challenge each of you today to flap your wings, no matter how small or how big they may be, because you never know what small action may cause a tornado of change to bring about peace and an end to human trafficking. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Bill. Bill, real quickly before you go, you have several questions in the chat. Would safe home certification include domestic violence, sexual abuse shelters?
So that's a good question. It's one that's being, so currently, yes, they would if they serve survivors of human trafficking. The certification program is specific to programs that serve survivors of trafficking. I would argue that the programming necessary for a human trafficking survivor is different than a domestic violence victim. And so, but this is an area of debate, mostly around resource constraints, saying, well, we've got these shelters, can we leverage them for human trafficking? I think that, you know, the answer, as is everything, right? It's a complex answer. But I do think that programming needs to be specific. If you try to put a survivor of trafficking in a domestic violence program, it's going to fail. And I also think that survivors of domestic violence, survivors of trafficking, could disrupt each other's restorative care process if they're placed into the same program.
And there's a second question from Hilda. Would this certification mean that we at the Mission Haven could take more children in personally while we still hunt for land to build our big facility?
So I think that certification accomplishes a couple of things. One, it is a testament to the world that your programming is good, right? And so I think that allows you to bring in more referrals. I think it also opens organizations up to additional funding opportunities because now they are a certified organization. If you think about it, right? If we're traveling, are we going to look for a 5-star hotel or a 1-star hotel, right? And I think that it's a loose analogy, but I think it sort of applies to this space as well. And that is, if funders are going to be funding, if donors are going to be donating, and organizations are going to be referring in, right, then they want to know that is a solid program that is doing what it's supposed to be doing.
And just one more question, Bill, because we have to move on to our next speaker. Is there a risk from ages 20 to 25 is there a risk for women from the ages of 20 to 25 that may also be at risk? There are a series of these reports from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and then we'll go on to Erin.
Yes, so it is truly something that cuts across all ages, right? And I also want to point out it cuts across all genders as well. So males are just as vulnerable as females in a lot of these different situations. I personally have worked cases with survivors that were in their 50s. I know others have worked, we're starting to see trafficking sort of trickle into the elder fraud and abuse realm as well, where they're taking advantage of older people if you can imagine. But yes, 20 to 25 is a very vulnerable age. We're also seeing a lot of vulnerabilities on college campuses because this is the first time that somebody's away from their parents. They don't have that direct supervision. So I know we're working with a lot of college campuses as well to help safeguard and educate those young people. But yeah, I would say no age is too young or too old to be at risk.
Thank you, Bill. We did have one more question, but I really need to get to Erin here. And so, excuse me, Erin, can you unmute yourself too? Erin? Oh, good. Okay, great. So I'm introducing, thank you so much, Bill. You are just such a blessing to have every year at this conference. So now we're going to be hearing from Erin Fisher, who is Bill's executive director he was the founder of Anti-Trafficking International, and she is its executive director right now. And she is a 1998 graduate of Columbus School of Law at Catholic University of America. She has her BS in criminology from Penn State. She spent 22 years in academia serving Northern Virginia and the surrounding DC communities. And most importantly, Erin believes that education, and I agree with her so much, equals empowerment. And she looks forward to building relationships with community organizations and school districts around the globe to make human trafficking prevention education available to everyone. Please welcome Erin Fisher. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen here with you all and put it on correct view. There we go. So thank you so much. Thank you for having me here today. And thank you all for taking part of your day to learn about what you can do to be a part of the fight against human trafficking. I am a mom of 6 kids. And as Judy introduced me, education has always been a very important thing in my life. However, the most influential education that I received was from my father. I grew up in Chicago. My dad was a Chicago police officer. He worked most of his career as a homicide detective. If any of you are children of a law enforcement professional, you know that your education on safety began at a very, very young age. We talked very openly in our home about safety and protection and trusted adults. Sometimes our conversations were graphic and uncomfortable. They were very much unlike the conversations I would have at my friends' houses with their families. I was also a child of the DARE era, where we talked about drugs a lot. That commercial with the egg in the frying pan seemed to come on every other time during our sitcoms that we would watch, and it would say, "This is your brain on drugs." Though that current commercial could be a little annoying, it got us talking about an issue that needed to be talked about and seen. In 2018, I attended a conference at a local church that was about human trafficking in the Metro DC area. Human trafficking wasn't a topic that I talked about in my criminology classes at Penn State or in law school unless it pertained to things going on overseas. It was there that I heard Susan Young's story, met Bill Wolfe, and became educated on the reality of gang-controlled trafficking happening in the same place that I was raising my children, and it horrified me. It was at that time that I began volunteering with ATI, and I couldn't sit back. I couldn't do nothing when I knew what was happening right under my nose. I volunteered for 2.5 years and then stepped into the role of executive director. ATI was founded in 2013 as the Just Ask Prevention Foundation, and it was designed in conjunction with a federally funded regional task force, with its primary purpose being to deliver prevention education in local, state, federal, and international communities. At ATI, our mission is to stop human trafficking before it starts, and we do this through peer-to-peer education and bystander empowerment. We offer prevention education to schools, youth groups, and community-run programs for youth. We train professionals who are on the front line of combating human trafficking, especially people like foster parents who are preparing to take in children that have a high likelihood of having been trafficked. Most importantly, we provide community outreach programs for every community, because we know that human trafficking is not only in the big cities, overseas, or in seedy hotels. It's happening in plain sight. Education is empowerment. If we don't have the words to define what's happening in our society, we cannot appropriately or effectively prevent it. I gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago to a group of high school students who were enrolled in a wonderful program that prepared them for their futures. I shared a story about a young girl from Illinois who had broken up with her long-term boyfriend. In his anger and hurt, after she broke up with him, he airdropped all the nude photos that she had shared with him during their relationship. The students gasped and some chuckled. See, today sharing nude photos is a fairly normal practice when teens are discerning whether or not to date another person. That's kind of scary. And it's not something I, as a mother, would ever assume that my children would be doing. I then asked the children, the teens at the conference, about sextortion and if they had ever heard of it. Only 3 of the students raised their hands out of a group of about 200. Sextortion is a type of human trafficking because there's a commercial exchange involved. Normally, it involves a scammer or an acquaintance who gains the trust of another person, male or female, by building a relationship online or in person. After that bond is made and trust is established, the scammer will ask for intimate videos or pictures. The victim believes that there's a relationship being built. To further strengthen that bond, the scammer would send pictures, not of themselves, but of other people posing to be him or her, and they will share nudes and videos in exchange. Once the explicit images are received in the hands of the scammer, they will extort money for more pictures from the victim. In the story I shared, the high school girl's life was ruined. Her photos and identity were shared on all sorts of social media platforms. The boyfriend ultimately was charged with distribution of child sexual material, but the girl was continually harassed by strangers online who threatened her safety in exchange for money and more photos. She was too embarrassed in the beginning to tell her parents what had happened, and the extortion continued for over a year. The high schoolers I presented to became visibly uncomfortable as I went through the story, and a majority of them broke eye contact with me really fast, most likely because some of them had sent inappropriate pictures and videos to other people. The culture today does not teach them to share less. It teaches and encourages youth to share more. Young people don't understand the far-reaching consequences of their behaviors. And unfortunately, parents did not grow up with the type of technology that we have today. This is why being educated about the dangers present in today's world, whether a child or adult, is crucially important. Sextortion is a fairly new crime thanks to the lockdown during COVID. Isolation and loneliness were real, and people longed for connections. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the rates of online enticement jumped 30% in only 2 years. Reports of online enticement of children to perform sexual acts were reported 38,000 times in 2020. In 2022, it increased to 81,000 reports. The possession and distribution and manufacturing of child pornography reports increased by 10 million between 2020 and 2022. And most disturbing of all, reports of unsolicited, obscene materials sent to a child rose from 3,500 reports to over 35,000 reports in 2022. This is all horrific and scary stuff, but we can't avoid the issue. As uncomfortable and difficult as it is, human trafficking and sexual exploitations are topics that we need to be educated about, not only for ourselves, but for the children that are in our lives. By knowing what human trafficking is, you can help it stop from becoming the largest criminal enterprise on earth. Education equals empowerment. At ATI, we offer prevention programs for schools, youth organizations, faith-based organizations, professionals, and communities. Our prevention educator team is made up of trained volunteers that come from all walks of life. They present awareness events to educate the public on the basics of human trafficking. This is how I first learned about human trafficking. It's where my journey started to educate others began. One event will snowball into 2 or 3 more events, and so on and so on. The events inspire others to educate communities within their own homes and those of their extended family. By knowing the vulnerabilities, by knowing the red flags, the methods that traffickers use, and the dangers online, you can prevent a person from becoming a victim or recognizing a person who is. At the event I attended in 2018, 2 mothers I knew casually through social circles sat in that same audience. Both were mothers to teenagers who had been excellent students with goals and dreams, but in a short period began to become defiant and uninterested in what was important to them. They knew something was wrong with their child, but they couldn't quite understand what. They didn't go to the conference seeking an answer to why their children were behaving a certain way. They were there because someone invited them to the event. When they listened to the presentations and learned about the signs of a trafficking victim, they knew their children were being groomed. In both cases, the children were saved before more harm could be done. The parents' gut feelings were right. Something was off. But it wasn't until they had the education about human trafficking, traffickers, red flags, and vulnerabilities that they could identify what was happening in their own homes. ATI's Just Ask Prevention curriculum, which is our school curriculum, reaches over 350,000 children in the US and was customized to be used in 3 foreign countries. It was developed by professional curriculum developers for grades 6 through 10 and is a teacher-led discussion-based lesson which can be presented in 1 or 2 class periods. It discusses a real case of a child who was the same age who were victimized. They were actually Bill's cases that he had worked on personally. The curriculum covers topics such as teen trafficking, healthy relationships, abuse, exploitation, sex trafficking, and consent, a concept that many children don't understand. Each lesson will highlight the themes of hope, respect, choice, and community responsibility. In each grade level, we encourage the children to have 3 trusted adults in their lives that they can go to if they feel unsafe. It's critical that they build those healthy relationships of trust when they're young. Maria was a successful student in high school who had just about everything going for her. She was getting excellent grades. She lettered in multiple sports. She was beginning to look at colleges, but she didn't have a boyfriend, and that made her feel really out of place in her friend group. After turning 16 and getting her license, Maria was allowed to get a job at the mall, and she met a college student who had been working in a kiosk near her work. They'd met and hit it off and eventually started dating. However, Maria couldn't tell her family that the relationship was going on because he was a little bit older and her parents really didn't want her to start dating while school was the primary importance. After a few months, Maria's boyfriend went to her with a heavy ask. He was going to be evicted from his apartment because he had forgotten to pay rent for the last 2 months. He needed her help. Maria couldn't give him the money he needed because her parents would notice the large withdrawal. He told her that if she couldn't help him, he would have to move back home, which was 3 states away. Maria was devastated and said she wished she could help him. It was at that time he mentioned that his best friend had always mentioned how hot she was and that he would be willing to pay to have sex with her. At first, Maria said no, but the boyfriend continued to pressure her. It was only this one time, and then he could stay. She asked him to give her a bit of time to think about it. This is a true story. The next day, Maria was at school, and in her health class, the teacher presented the 10th grade Just Ask Prevention lesson. Maria, as she sat through the class, noticed too many similarities and stayed after class to tell her teacher. The teacher and the school counselor talked with her and brought her mom in. The police were called, and the so-called boyfriend was arrested and sent to prison for a significant amount of time. He had, in fact, been trafficking other girls while he was grooming Maria.
Wow.
Again, the education Maria had that day not only gave her the words to identify what was happening, but it empowered her to tell the adults that she trusted. One more piece that we need to talk about and understand is the demand side of trafficking and pornography. If there was no demand, there would not be the need to victimize or exploit a person. The reason human trafficking is so profitable is because many are buying it. The most common demographic is white middle-aged men married with children and active members in their communities. I saw a lot of men on this conference today, and I am so proud that you are here. We need men to stand up and empower others to take a stand against this. Demand higher penalties for buyers. Talk to the young men and boys in your life about the issues that they face today. The average age of a child when they first see pornography is 8 years old. What they witness is how they normalize the concepts of sex and relationships. We must be vigilant on this topic and prepare to have really uncomfortable conversations. So, what can you do? You took the first step today by coming to this conference in fighting human trafficking. Educating yourself will allow you to educate others. It will empower you to be a leader in your community. There's a few things that you can do to prevent trafficking before it starts. First, tell 3 people today what you learned. Keep the conversation going. Just as my dad had those difficult conversations with me and when I was young, you can have those conversations with others. Educate yourself more about trafficking and what resources are available in your community. Reach out if you notice someone is exhibiting red flags. Ask questions and listen. Don't victim blame. Don't try to solve the problem. Host parent and community outreach events to raise awareness and protect youth. Encourage students to have their 3 trusted adults, including your own or not students, maybe students or your own children, to have 3 trusted adults. Hold training events in your workplace if you are on the front lines. Reach out to your schools to ensure that prevention education is offered. Contact, as Bill said, your political and community leaders to support and to combat human trafficking. Use available resources available through local, state, federal, and nonprofit organizations. Become part of the solution. Education is the key to stopping trafficking before it starts. You are welcome to reach out to ATI and become an ambassador. I want to thank you again for your time and attention. Please reach out to us if you'd like to know how you can be trained to educate and empower your communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erin. Now, real quickly, Nikki has shared on the chat ncdemandreduction.com. Thank you so much, Nikki. I love that place. I love that site, ncdemandreduction.com. And as Erin said, if you see anything suspicious, but you don't know what you're looking at, you think you're seeing a red flag, you can call ATI, the number there, Erin?
Yes, that's it. Oh, I just dropped it. Sorry. I can
That's
share
okay.
that again.
But you can also call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 888-373-7888. And Erin's going to share Anti-Trafficking International, just so you know what the red flags are. You may see something like she mentioned about the case that she observed, the 2 girls that were depressed or whatever. So and can you read the number? Because it's a little small on my end, Erin.
Sure. We'll go up to it. 1-833 ask to end.
1-833 ask the number 2 end.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. And Linda says she wants to volunteer for ATI. So Linda, I will send you that name, Erin, after this is over. Okay.
Judy, it's probably almost easier for them to email the general info at Prevent HT. The email is monitored every day, all day long.
Right.
And I can get more information out that way.
And that's info@preventht as in human trafficking.org, correct?
That's correct.
Thanks. And I shared your website with everybody ahead of
Thank
time.
you so
Thank
much.
you very much. And we're going to turn to a second to Susan Young. I just have to do a couple little things here. Mute. And Susan, I'm looking for you. Hold on. Susan, do you have your video on?
Yes, I do.
I just have to find you. I'm sorry. It takes a minute.
No problem.
Hold on. And oh, your video, obviously, because I can hear you. That's good. Susan. So there you are. Hi, Susan.
Hello.
Nice to see you. So I'm
Nice to-
welcoming Susan Young, who is the Parent Coalition Director at Anti-Trafficking International. As we all mentioned, it's a pleasure to welcome you back because you really gave the talk that everybody is still talking about, I think 5 years later, more than anybody else. She has served as the Executive Director for the Parent Coalition to End Human Trafficking since 2017, establishing programs and services to aid victims, parents, and families in recovery from HT. Thankfully, she has trained thousands of law enforcement personnel, spoken with government leaders from the White House to Congress to state legislative organizations. I've seen that video, as well as international organizations in the areas of human trafficking prevention, human trafficking's impact, and recovery laws. She has associated and assisted with the establishment or revision of laws and legislation at both the federal and state levels to impose more stringent regulations for HT actors. Susan and her family are surviving victims of human trafficking and are advocates for the eradication of human traffic globally. In addition to all this work, she is an experienced corporate executive and managed the establishment of services and capabilities for corporate personnel, human resources, and corporate operations. It is my pleasure to introduce you to an unbelievable speaker, Susan Young. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Dr. Paparosi, and thank you, Dr. Allen, for inviting me back here today to share our family's testimony not just how it affects the victims, but how human trafficking affects the family unit as a whole. I think we need to talk about that more because, yes, it does affect the victims, but the family unit suffers tremendously through a type of situation like this as well. I met Bill Wolf, my friend, under some pretty precarious circumstances back in 2012, 2013. He was the gang detective assigned to my daughter's trafficking case. And at that time, he was the only resource our family had to navigate this situation. Through his guidance and support, we were able to receive help for our daughter and support services. But as he mentioned, our family fell through the cracks through every system, whether it was the criminal justice system, whether it was the healthcare system. No one knew how to help our family. And I'll share a little more about that as well. And so it was with his guidance and support that I started the Parent Coalition in 2017. Just to give you a little background on this, our situation occurred in 2012, 2013. Our eldest daughter, I have 4 children. I had just turned 15 at the time. I had 2 small boys who were 12 and 11. And my youngest daughter was 2.5 to 3 years old at the time. I'm going to read our family's testimony today because it is very hard. It is still very raw 12 years later. And as I read it, I go through flashbacks and things. So in order for me to get out all of the information to share with you guys today, I have to read it. That is just my coping mechanism to be able to provide this information to you. So as mentioned, I'm a mother of 4 amazing children. I grew up in Northern Virginia, attended local schools. And from the outside, our family was a normal family. Our daughter and family attended youth group, local sports clubs. We were very active within our community. We've had numerous friends. And for all intents and purposes, our daughter was the stereotypical girl next door. My story begins on a sunny August afternoon. 12 years ago, my 15-year-old daughter was celebrating the last few days of summer vacation with her friends at a local movie theater. It all seemed innocent enough, a few teenage girls getting together before the start of high school. At the theater, my daughter met a boy who was close in age and also lived in the area. He was handsome, polite, and seemingly well-mannered. It all appeared innocuous. The boy seemed harmless and well-intentioned, so they exchanged phone numbers and Facebook information. Unfortunately, he was not what he appeared to be. Rather than a sweet, innocent guy, he was an MS-13 gang member. His job was to recruit young girls, entice them through friendship, and lure them into the dark world of human trafficking. Their relationship began with an occasional phone call, transitioning to text message, and eventually an online friendship. Their friendship seemed harmless enough. After all, how much trouble could they get into through Facebook or text messaging? Before I knew it, my daughter was head over heels for a boy I had never met. Over the next few weeks, our daughter's mood began to change. She grew distant, pulling back from the family. In what seemed to be overnight, her behavior transitioned from distant to rebellious and eventually deceitful. She started lying and stealing from us. We later learned that she was also lashing out at her childhood friends and distancing herself from previously close and trusted friendships. Eventually, her grades began to drop, and she started missing class altogether. Little did we know that the gang was brainwashing our daughter. They would tell her that we didn't love her and that she was not wanted at home and that she was a burden to our family. To make matters worse, we later learned that her new friend had introduced her to MS-13 gang affiliates at her local high school. These affiliates initially befriending her and eventually bullying her. Our daughter reached out 22 times to the school's resource officer and resource counselor, who took no action to remediate her requests. Her pleas for help simply fell on deaf ears. Eventually, the bullying turned into violence. A group of 5 individuals took our daughter to a secluded part of the school's property. She was hit over the head and pushed to the ground and gang raped by multiple guys while others watched and videotaped. When they were finished, they told my daughter that if she ever told anyone what had happened, they would share the video with friends and family. After all, what family could want or love such a disgraceful daughter such as her? Our daughter will tell you that a piece of her died that day, which opened the door to shame and self-hate. This was the opportunity that the traffickers had been waiting for. Their product was broken and destroyed, broken beyond reproach and stripped of all she held dear, her dignity, her childlike innocence. Shattered and broken, Courtney was theirs to command. Immediately, they trafficked Courtney every day after school. She would be taken to a nearby house where 8 to 10 gentlemen were waiting. She could not leave until she was finished. Once at home, she was required to pretend as if nothing had happened. If she gave any indication about the trafficking or the abuse, they threatened to kill her parents and sell her little sister instead. Courtney continued to comply with their every demand out of fear. Now, I assumed that gang members were a disorganized group of kids who just like to hang out and cause trouble. This is not the case. MS-13 is a well-orchestrated organization with money, resources, and a plan of coercion, deceit, and addiction for purpose. Our home was under constant supervision, again, all without our knowledge. They followed and tracked our every move. They even learned our shopping patterns, when and what time we would leave our house, and the average length of time we would be gone and when we would return. My husband and I were at our wits' end. How could we help our daughter? She was spiraling out of control right before our eyes. We felt helpless. The more we tried to gain control over her and the situation, the more she fought back. We would ground her and she would lash out at us and other family members. Her brothers began to resent her and us. Little did we know that they played their own part in this situation, but they were too scared to speak up. Our only indication that something was terribly wrong was our 3-year-old daughter. She would constantly point to her bedroom window and say, bad man is coming to get me." Being only 3, we thought she was having bad dreams. After all, we had never seen a bad man at the window. Then everything came to a head one early February morning. I received a call at 3:30 in the morning from the boy our daughter had met at the movie theater over the summer. He said, "Mrs. Young, you have to help Courtney. You have to get her someplace safe." My reply was, "Of course she is safe. She's upstairs sleeping." "No, she is not. She is currently at a party with some friends. She's drunk and she's high and she needs your help." Immediately, I hung up the phone and called her cell phone. Nothing. I tried to track her phone, but the gang had turned off the tracking feature. Immediately, I called the police. When the police arrived, they knew a slew of information I did not. They knew who she was with, and they also knew their activities. Apparently, the police had been watching the situation for quite some time. We later learned out that the boy that she was currently with was a 20-year-old sophomore who attended her high school with a past criminal record. I knew deep down something was not right. As I sat there listening to the officers and answering their questions, memories of my daughter kept flashing across my mind. It is then that I realized my daughter, my darling baby girl, was living a secret life I knew nothing about. Fear rippled throughout my body. Will I ever see her again? That was a question no one could answer. "How do we find her?" I asked the officer. His reply was, "You need to wait 24 hours before she is considered a missing person. Then we can start to take the situation seriously." I felt helpless and afraid. All I could do was wait 24 hours while my daughter was going through God knows what before help could come. But what if I couldn't get to her in time? That was not good enough for me. I was going to find my daughter without the help of the police. Something deep inside told me that she needed me to find her, and by God, I would not stop until she was safe at home with her family. The following morning, I received additional information about the guy she was with. I did my own research on the internet, and my worst fears were confirmed. The men that she was currently with were known human traffickers in our area. I fell to my knees. My helpless baby girl was with these monsters. My soul shattered into a million pieces. We enlisted the help of a local TV station to put out the word that our daughter was missing and endangered. Finally, there was a break with the help of one of our daughter's friends, who confirmed where she was. I drove to the address and I sat outside wanting to break down the door. Luckily, I called police instead. I gave them the information and told them where I was. I was immediately ordered to go to the police station to wait. They eventually found my daughter locked in the trafficker's closet. When they brought my daughter in for questioning, they treated the situation as a runaway. My daughter was not a runaway. I asked the lead detective for advice and was told to send her to school the next day and pretend as if the whole situation had never happened. "Are you crazy?" was my reply to the officer. "I simply want to help my daughter." In the days to come, she grew more withdrawn, depressed, and closed off from the family. The days that follow were a nightmare. Everywhere I turned, no one would help. Hospitals, doctors, even our own pediatrician couldn't help. We enlisted the help of several counselors, but no one knew how to help our daughter. One doctor even accused her of lying and making up the entire situation. All I knew was I had to keep my daughter safe. At this point, we did not know what she had endured, and we had no idea what MS-13 was capable of. The situation continued to escalate. I awoke on Mother's Day morning to a pounding on our front door. It was our neighbor's son. He noticed our daughter walking down the street with some of the gang members. He tried to engage them and take Courtney back home. They threatened him with harm if he did not leave her in the situation alone. So he came to our home to let us know what was happening. I ran down the street barefoot in my pajamas, screaming my daughter's name the entire time. But by the time I had reached the end of the street, I was too late. Courtney was gone again. After 2 agonizing weeks, our daughter was found. Police had intercepted a transaction at a local Dunkin' Donuts where she was being sold to an out-of-state gang for $2,000. As a mother, my child's worth is priceless, but some gang member decided her worth was $2,000. This enraged me. When they brought my daughter into the police station for questioning, they asked me to go and speak with her. When I entered the room where my daughter was being held, I stood back and I gasped. Who was this lifeless girl in front of me? She was a pale shadow of the daughter I had once known. I tried to talk to her. Where were you? What happened? But I couldn't get a coherent sentence out of her. Frustrated and overwhelmed, I yelled, "What happened to you? Where were you?" with tears streaming down my face. But the same grumbling noises came from her frail and lifeless body. After we left the police station, we checked her into a local hospital for help. God knows I couldn't help her any longer, and all my husband and I knew was we had to keep her safe. The hard part was trying to figure out how. Our nightmare was about to take another deep and dark turn. The gang was not happy that our daughter did not return home with us, so they started to retaliate against the family. After all, their product was bought and paid for, and they wanted her back. I was followed in public, threatened in public. One girl came up to me at a local grocery store and said, "We will have your daughter one way or another. You can count on that." A guy tried to force his way into our house while I was at home with my youngest daughter. When the gang realized my eldest daughter would not be home for quite some time, they turned their focus on a smaller victim, my 3-year-old daughter. I was told if they couldn't have my older daughter, they would settle for my youngest instead. I was warned not to go into public by myself or with my younger daughter for any reason. My eldest son was threatened and beaten at school. They wanted to know where his older sister was. It got so bad that we had to have him escorted to class by the school's resource officer, and he had to eat lunch in the office every day to ensure his safety. My husband and I were both filled with rage. How can this happen? Where is our justice? As I searched to find answers as to how we could heal our family, there were very few places that provided training to help traffic victims, let alone their family. We were able to get help for our daughter, but had to seek outside help for our other children. When our situation occurred, human trafficking was just a blip on the radar screen. We didn't have many resources to choose from. The guilt my husband and I felt was tremendous. How could we not see this? How could we not know that this was happening to our own children? I was a full-time stay-at-home mom. How did I miss this? The regrets we both carry, I doubt will ever go away. Our youngest daughter is now 15 and still sleeps in our room every night. We have converted our sitting room into a makeshift bedroom so she can feel normal. It is too traumatizing for her to be away from us, especially at night. She has a fear of loud noises and bright lights. She cannot participate in the safety drills at school for fear that the bad man might one day return for her. Every day is a struggle for us to regain a sense of normalcy. Our oldest son blames himself for not protecting his younger siblings from the abuse and torture. The anger and the rage that we all feel is still raw 12 years later, like it just happened yesterday. We had to learn to trust one another all over again. I fight back my pain each and every day. I force myself to get out of bed, but there is something I realized early on. My husband and I were the ones keeping the family together. We couldn't fall apart. We couldn't shatter into a million pieces like we wanted to. So we allowed our children to. We were there to help them stand and eventually walk, and we soon learned that we were healing as well. As you can imagine, our family was completely and utterly destroyed. My husband and I wondered, how were we going to rebuild our family? Is it even possible after so much has happened? How do you put 4 little souls back together again? Courtney spent almost 5 years in intensive inpatient residential therapy to overcome the complex PTSD, anxiety, trauma, and depression she suffered through her trafficking experience. Courtney was committed to her treatment and wanted to live a normal life again. She has graduated high school and now attends a local community college. She is pursuing a career in veterinary medicine. However, life for Courtney will always proceed at a much slower pace. Dealing with the daily trauma and anxiety-related issues is hard, but she is determined to not let anything stand in the way of her happiness. Our 2 boys still struggle to maintain relationships, trusting individuals, and opening up to anyone. Our oldest son has had to move out west to gain situational awareness and inner healing. Our youngest son is now a senior at UVA and is pursuing a career in finance. The traffickers were never held accountable for Courtney's trafficking or abuse. Virginia did not establish its trafficking laws until 2015. So if we had gone to court, Courtney would have been treated as a criminal rather than treated as a victim. I am a mother who has been broken beyond measure. A mother who has had to look into her young children's eyes and explain the evil that was done to them was never their fault. Therefore, I have made it my life's mission to educate others to the dangers of trafficking. And I implore you to share this information that you have learned here today with others so that together we can stop this heinous crime once and for all. Thank you.
Oh, Susan, I'm without words, but thank you so much for having the courage to share your family story with all of us. And it really has changed so many lives. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. We kind of have to move on. And Freddie is saying, Susan, Courtney is a survivor, and God bless you and your family. We're praying for continued healing. And I'm so proud to see the pictures of your family. You look so beautiful, and everybody, you have done such a wonderful job, you and your husband, to protect those 4 souls, your children. So Susan, I think everybody's going to definitely keep you in their thoughts and prayers for the rest of their lives. Your story is incredible, and you're changing. You're protecting people just by sharing your story. You are preventing human trafficking. All these parents, all these family members will be so aware of what we all need to do to make sure nothing happens to us like it happened to your family.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So thank you. I'm going to move on to somebody who actually does work with victim families, like Susan's family, Susan's daughter, Courtney. Father Jeff Behe, who was the founder and board member of Metanoia Manor in Louisiana. He's a native of Louisiana. He's an ordained priest for the Diocese of Baton Rouge. He was ordained in 1979. He was educated as a BA in psychology, a Master of Divinity, a doctorate in pastoral counseling. In addition to the many ministries that Father Behe has been involved with, he's also worked extensively in prison systems, and he served as the director of vocations and seminarians for the Diocese of Baton Rouge, a pastor at St. Jules Catholic Church, a CEO of Closer Walk Ministries, an associate pastor for years in several rural Louisiana parishes, and he has a special interest in youth retreat work and human trafficking, thankfully. He's the author of several books, including Paved with Souls, written about his experience while working with Mother Teresa and the Missionaries of Charity in Calcutta. And he's the founder, as I said, of Metanoia Manor, an organization helping trafficked adolescent girls, which opened in 2018. Welcome, Father Behe.
Thank you.
Oh, you're unmuted. Great. Thank you.
Doctor, so much for having me. And Susan, I just want to say that God bless you. Your journey's been incredible. And I am so grateful that your daughter, regardless of what she's been through, has a family like you to support her. I have many kids who don't have the same story. And as difficult as it was to listen to you, I am so grateful your daughter has you. And in time, the healing, I pray, will take place. And thank you so much. I have been involved in human trafficking since 2001. My catechist was a nun that I met in Rome by the name of Sister Eugenie Bonetti. And she has a statement that I live by today. And I hope everyone here takes the opportunity to realize that no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. As you listen to all the things that we've heard today, you have to realize it's such a multidisciplinary situation that in order to really deal with this, everyone has to be involved. As I was listening to Susan, I realized just this week where I live, and it's outside of a metropolitan area, 4 miles from me, they arrested a young man who was trafficking three teenage girls, 13, 14, 15. But here's the backstory. The young man is currently 28 years old. He was arrested in 2015 for carnal knowledge of a juvenile, 2016 for carnal knowledge of a juvenile, 2019 for human trafficking, 2021 for human trafficking, and the young man was still on the streets being able to traffic 3 more children last week. And I say this because there's a breakdown in the system. Over the years, I've brought many of my children. I have a brother who's an attorney who escorts them to court. And they will go 3 or 4 times to court and never get past a motion hearing. And when these children have to deal with their trafficker, they don't sleep for 2 days. They have diarrhea. They throw up everything. They're so nervous. They're so scared. They age out, and then they decide no one cares about me. They're just protecting the traffickers. So it's so incumbent upon us to realize that with all of our good intentions, we need support from law enforcement to legislatures to judiciaries to district attorneys. Everyone needs to be involved in this fight, because the average is that it takes a victim to be rescued 7 times before they actually get out of the trafficking world, 7 times. And for anyone who's new to this world of human trafficking, you'll very quickly realize that the stats are very, very different. You know, when you start talking about statistics, they're all over the board. I work with the United Nations and the Order of Malta Permanent Observer. According to the United Nations, we have 49.6 million people trafficked globally every year. And the United States consumes 10% of the world's trafficking victims, which means 4.9 million people are bought and sold in the United States every year. I work regularly with the former congressman from Texas, Congressman Ted Poe, along with my colleague, Father Chuck Swanson, and he was the head of the Victims' Rights Caucus in Congress. And this is his statistic. In the United States, we have over 5,000 animal rescue shelters, each one housing 100 to 1,000 animals. But here, where we have 4,900,000 victims every year, we have less than 1,000 beds to care for our victims. One of the things that we need to address, and it's everyone has a role to play, but our role is to try to make sure that we have a healthy, safe environment for the restoration of these victims. And when we talk about victims of human trafficking, we're not simply talking about ordinary trauma. You know, we happen to deal with juveniles, and we have juveniles with oppositional defiance disorder. We have juveniles with really bad home situations. We have juveniles who have drug problems. But when you've been bought and sold and repeatedly raped for money, your trauma is different from everyone else. And so when we try to establish, okay, this child's been trafficked, let's put them in a group home. A group home doesn't work. There's a special type of treatment for victims of human trafficking. All of our professionals who work are schooled in what they call TBRI, trauma-based relational intervention. You would think after a child has been trafficked and they come to a safe house, they would be so very happy and so very grateful not to be living like they've been forced to live for the past few years. No, they're not. They're angry. They don't trust people. They don't trust people in authority. And they're going to push you, and they're going to challenge you every step of the way. And this TBRI helps us to respond to the hurt and not to the words. Helps us to respond to what's going on in the individual. One of the people I work with very closely is a man by the name of Kevin Hyland. Kevin is internationally known. He's a former trafficking commissioner from Scotland Yard, and Kevin and I spoke last night in preparation. The figure for human trafficking has been $152 billion a year. According to the ILO, and it came out this week, now the profit margin for the selling of the human person is $236 billion a year that we make off of the sale of the human person. And when you think about that, and we just recently, and I agree with Bill Wolf, Chris Smith has been a great advocate, but they just passed in the U.S. legislature, in the House, a bill to have $175 million for trafficking victims over the next 5 years. And over the next 5 years, we're going to have $1 trillion worth. If we continue at this rate, we'll have $1 trillion worth of profit, and we roughly $30 million a year to fight the problem. There's so many different areas that we have to deal with. One of the things that we have found very, very important is as we look at globally, as we look at gangs that dealt with her daughter and everything, as we deal with the problem, that as much as we need to look at law enforcement, judiciary, global trafficking, the ILO, follow the money trails, much as we look at that, if we don't have a safe place for the victims when they're discovered, the chances of them going back and repeating it another 6, 7 times a year is very, very high. We're very proud of the fact that there's a National Human Trafficking Shelter Alliance. We're the only juvenile shelter in the United States who's been accredited by the National Human Trafficking Shelter Alliance. And I really want to talk about our shelter. We've been in operation 6 years now. And in those 6 years, we have welcomed 97 girls to our shelter. Of those 97 girls, 86 are Louisiana born. Another 7 are from other US states. And only 4 have been international. When we talk about education, everyone is under the improper perception that the reason why human trafficking is a problem is because I saw The Sound of Freedom and I know it's going on over there, and because we have problems at the border, everyone's going to think that's where the human trafficking problem is. That's not where the human trafficking, it is a problem, certainly. And when we uncover what's going on the border, our numbers are going to grow exponentially. But right now, what we're dealing with is not international children. Now, from my perspective, no child deserves to be treated like this, regardless of where their country of origin is. But we need to understand that it's in our neighborhoods, it's in our schools, it's in our children. And for the 3 P's, prevention, prosecution, and protection, we've got to get it in the schools. And what was amazing to me is when The Sound of Freedom came out, there was a great outcry against this movie. People did not want it to be seen, and they said it was indoctrination, and it wasn't true. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know where that mentality comes from the media or from Hollywood. I don't understand why this movie was shelved for 4 years, but I can only surmise that the reason why people don't want the fact that we're buying and selling children to be exposed is maybe they're covering for somebody. I can't say that for sure, but I think we need to understand that. Let me tell you about the metanoia model. And this was begun when I had the opportunity to start work, like I said, in Rome with this nun, Sister Eugenia Bonetti. And she made me aware of this problem. I learned that in 2001. My first shelter that I opened was in Lagos, Nigeria, in 2013. In 2015, I opened up a shelter in Nettuno, Italy. And in 2018, we welcomed our first girls to Metanoia in February of 2018. One of the things that our children have told us is when they were in foster care or when they were in the state group homes, when they woke up, they never knew who was going to be there. They never knew there was another 8-hour shift coming in. The average stay for someone working in a human trafficking shelter is less than 6 months. The pay is not that good. The stress is tremendous. And so we had to find a situation where we could have some consistency and someone that the children would trust. One of the things, and I built a 16-bedroom, 16-bathroom home. Each child has their own room, their own little closet, their desk, their chest of drawers and everything like that. When our children come, they wouldn't sleep in the bed. they slept in the closet. And we never understood why they slept in the closet. But as they were growing up and living in the life of trafficking, they were used to being awakened in the middle of the night and being told we need to go get money. And so they would sleep in the closet. And after 2, 3 months, our children, when they moved out of the closet, we knew that they trusted us. We knew that they felt safe and we were not going to let anyone get to them. Our children would come and within the first month, they would gain 10, 15 pounds. We have meals 3 times a day. Well, when they were being trafficked, supper may have been a bag of chips and a soda or drugs, whatever the case may be. They get there and they see all this food and they keep eating and they keep eating. A month later, they can't get in their jeans anymore, so they decide they're going to start taking care of themselves. But the real secret is, in our home, I have 5 religious sisters who live there, and 4 of them are registered nurses. 1 of them is a social worker, an MSW, but all of them are mothers. That has become the consistency in their life, that there's an adult in their life who's there for them, who loves them, who'll put up with whatever they're going to do and still love them. They don't understand nuns. They don't know why they dress so poorly and why they pray all the time. But they know that they're here and they love us. And it's worked. It's worked. And I think it's very, very important for people to understand that what we do is not proselytizing. We're not there to serve children who are Catholic. We're there to serve children who are in need. Now, our goal is that they come to have a relationship with the God as they've come to know him in their recovery. And so many a time on a Sunday morning, you will see religious sisters, and they'll be in Baptist churches and non-denominational churches, wherever the children feel like they're being fed, we bring them. We had a very, very tremendous state senator by the name of Senator Ronnie Johns, who passed legislation so that we can keep the children up to the age of 21 if they choose to stay. Our problem is with anyone who's raised an 18-year-old, when they get to be 18 years old, they know everything they need to know, and they know more than we know. So most of our children leave at 18. But it's been an incredible journey where these wonderful, wonderful religious sisters live with the children on the floor with them. Something happens in the middle of the night. They're walking down the hall. They hear a child crying. They'll go sit by the side of the bed. They'll be there as any mother would be there for their child. One of the things, and it's the reason why I thought our last presenter was so powerful, in Louisiana, 45% of our juveniles are trafficked by their primary caregivers. For us, for our residents, it's probably closer to 60% just among our residents. And the problem is that we don't have a safe place to send our child. When we began, they said, our goal is family reunification. I said, no, it isn't. I'm not going to do that. Out of 97 children, we've reunited 1 child with their family because, they come from dual addicted homes. They come from people who've been trafficking them. We have children who are 2nd and 3rd generation trafficked in their families. And so we've worked very, very hard. I'd like for anyone who's listening to this to ask, to go to YouTube. PBS did a documentary on our shelter, and it's called Turning the Tide, the story of hell, healing, and hope. Very, very powerful presentation. And that explains more of what we do than anything I can say. What I would like for everyone in this audience to know is myself and Father Chuck Swanson, my colleague, what we do now is our purpose is to travel around the country and help people establish shelters. We're trying to help people learn from our mistakes. Lord knows we made many of them as we first began, but we're trying to export that sister care model, try to help people get religious women who live there, become mothers. And again, I repeat, it's not proselytizing, it's enabling the children to have consistency and stability in their healing and restoration process. And we're more than willing to come. We don't charge anything. Obviously, our expenses have to be paid. We don't charge, but we're trying to export this model throughout the country because we know unless their first touch in recovery offers them some stability, many times it will be their seventh time when they're finally ready to get out because they're afraid, they think they're in love, they're addicted to drugs, whatever it might be. That's what we're doing. So, Doc, I appreciate so much the opportunity to be part of this. Again, someone just texted the name of the video is Turning the Tide, the story of hell, healing, and hope. You can find it on YouTube. And again, you can contact Dr. Judy for my contact information. We're ready to help. What we need is a safe place so that it doesn't take 7 times for a child to recover. Thank you for allowing me to be with you today.
Thank you, Father Behe. And what a perfect segue between Susan's testimony, which breaks our heart, and to know that you and these nuns are out there helping families that when Susan her daughter went 22 times and got nothing. So, and even from law enforcement, sadly. Thank you so much, Father Behe, and for telling us all about Metanoia Manor, which leads me to our next speaker who actually wrote about Metanoia Manor. I think he visited you down in Louisiana, Kevin Wells, who is also involved with another NGO called World Villages for Children as the Director of Public Relations, but he's also a former award-winning sports writer when he worked with the Tampa Bay Tribune covering the Tampa Bay Rays, a Major League Baseball team. He spent a month in World Villages. I think it's more than that now, though, Kevin. I think you've been there several times in Mexico, and he discovered the work of these nuns, Sisters of Mary, witnessing firsthand their round-the-clock, like Father Behe just described, work to nourish, house, catechize, and care for, in 7 different countries, 21,000 children. Kevin wrote the biography of World Villagers founder, priest and beggar, The Heroic Life of Venerable Aloysius Schwartz. As the Director of Public Relations for World Villages, Kevin travels throughout the United States to share stories on the missionary work of Father Al and the Sisters of Mary. He's a graduate of Loyola, studying journalism and creative writing. He is a great writer, I have to say, one of my favorites. He's been printed in many different his articles have been printed in numerous publications. After understanding Sisters of Mary preventative work against human trafficking, he made trips to meet Father Behe at Metanoia Manor, a home for survivors of human trafficking, as Father just explained. And he wrote an article on the work of Father Behe and Metanoia Manor, which was a beautiful article, which I think you can find, Kevin may tell you, Crisis Magazine online. You should be able to find that, Crisis Magazine. Kevin loves many things, including his family, his wife and family, but he loves baseball, reading, writing, and for some reason, he likes eating my eggplant parmesan. He lives in Maryland with his wife and 3 children. Welcome to my very dear friend, Kevin Wells.
Judy, what an honor it is to be invited into the mix today for such a, what's the word? There's really no word for it other than it's necessary that to bring up human trafficking and what we can do. And I've become aware of a lot of things I did not know when this began earlier this morning, and I praise God for that. I do want to say just very briefly, I just followed up a Titan in Father Behe. So it's Behe, that the A is silent, Behe.
Behe.
Yeah. So Father Behe, just briefly, he said something a few times, and I really want to core drill down on it. So you might have heard him mention that he travels the country with Father Chuck, his compatriot, to really try and, I think it's fair to say, convince others of the need, the mandate to open up more homes for the escape trafficked, and really that these sisters, I call them mothers, really they mother these children back to health. It's as Father Bahi could say far more than I. Um, to get into these blue whale sized wounds of sexual abuse demands a hero, it demands a saint. And I've met these 5 sisters that work with Father Bahi, and they're saints. I mean, they're saints, and what Father Bahi is doing in traveling the country and trying to raise awareness and open up more homes. Um, Candidly, I think that's about as important a thing as we can do right now. Awareness is enormous, but rubber meets the road is what Father Bahi's doing. Metanoia Manor is a place of resurrection, and my life was changed after I began to really understand what the demonic work of these monsters and what they do. And so, just briefly, what I'll do is I guess I'll explain a little bit who I am and what I do, and I think it's important for what we're speaking about today. Very important, and really, I think what it shows is really an enormous strobe light of hope in this in this monstrosity of human trafficking. And so, as Judy mentioned, I guess I wear a lot of hats. I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of articles, books, but really, I changed my life when in the year 2020, right at the start of COVID, I was in the process of writing a book. Actually, I hadn't started the book, but I needed to go to Mexico, to Girls Town in Chalco, Mexico, where there today, as we speak, there's over 3,000 girls that are being cared for by the Sisters of Mary. And I knew virtually nothing about human trafficking 4 years ago, nothing. And so I spent a month there in May of 2020, and even after I left, I just knew a little bit about these girls. So the Sisters of Mary, what they do is they travel to the most dangerous hotspots in Mexico. So they'll be in the West Coast in Guerrero, they'll be in Veracruz, Oaxaca, Mexico City. They'll go to the places of the poorest of the poor, where children are most vulnerable. It's not just girls. So there's 2,400 boys in Guadalajara, Mexico. And as Judy mentioned, there's 7 different countries where today more than 20,000 children right today are being taken care of by, I think now there's 392 Sisters of Mary. So the Father Bahi has 5, but I'm sure he'd like to have 395. So I've been fortunate enough to well, well, I just got back from Tanzania 2 weeks ago, where I spent a week at the boys' towns and girls' towns in Tanzania. So now I understand the devastation of what human trafficking is in these countries, because I'm a journalist. I'm a trained journalist. That's what I did for 10 years at a major daily newspaper. So I began to ask questions after 2020, and now I have a pretty good handle on how gruesome this world is. The violence of poverty, gives birth to so many incidents of trafficking, of rape, of sexual abuse, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes. But I do want to say this. One of my closest friends, his name is Father Dan Leary. Father Dan Leary in 2020 volunteered to become the full-time chaplain of the Sisters of Mary. So what does that mean? That means he has 0 days off. That means 365 days a year. He's working 15, 16, 17-hour days. There's no golf outings. There's no vacations at the beach, because there's too many kids. There's 20,000 kids. And when Father Dan went down in 2020 to be the chaplain, he didn't know about human trafficking either. He had no idea. But then he started to hear confessions, and he started to do spiritual direction. And what he soon began to learn after a few months was that probably 40 to 50% of these 20,000 children had been sexually abused, oftentimes, as many folks in this panel knows, oftentimes at extraordinarily early ages. So in the violence of poverty of Guerrero, a child will, well, I'll just say this. I heard this 2 weeks ago in Tanzania. where a girl said, she was about 12 years old. She said, and she was rescued by the Sisters of Mary. She said, when I was 11, we had no food in the house. So my dad was going to sell me to a man in his 40s for a cow. So that's very common. Your children or your stepchildren, they're commodity. It's money. Uh, how that works mentally in the conscience, I'll never understand how evil penetrates someone's soul and mind in that capacity. I don't know, and I never will this side of earth. But what Father Dan began to share with the Sisters of Mary in really in the fall of 2020 is, hey sisters, I don't think you understand. Um, the kids are reluctant to break open the depravity, the evil of what has happened to them. It's not all of them, sister, but I've come to believe it's about half of at least the teenage girls and many of the boys. They have been sexually abused throughout the world. And Father Dan as chaplain would travel throughout the world, so we continually heard these stories. It wasn't just Mexico; it was Brazil, Guatemala, Honduras, Tanzania, the Philippines. It was everywhere. So when the sisters, they kind of understood, but they didn't know of the magnitude of this. So when the sisters really began to become clear on that human trafficking from family members, I think it was Bill Wolf that said earlier in the day that I think he said 40% of those that are trafficked come from family members. Yeah, that's right. I would say with the Sisters of Mary, it's higher. It's higher than that. So much abuse happens with so-called stepfathers living in the home that will come into the room in the middle of the night and do their business, and then all of a sudden prostitution and pimping out begins. Here's the bright hallelujah of hope. Here's the strobe light of hope. Once the sisters understood of the trafficking dimension, they said, we are now preemptive workers in preventing human trafficking. So now they go into villages, the most dangerous villages really in the world. That's what they do. They go to the worst places. So for instance, in Guerrero, that's the west coast of Mexico. It's considered the most dangerous state in all of Mexico. So why is that? Well, Guerrero is mountainous, and traffickers can hide out in the mountains, and it's also by the sea, so they can escape if Mexico does in fact send up the army or police force to go after them. So it's a very easy place to traffic. So what the sisters now do, they go two by two. So sisters travel the world two by two, kind of like as Christ sent out his disciples two by two, and they know when they're climbing up these mountains, these goat paths to get to this little village, maybe with 15 or 20 little lean-tos or huts. They know they're going to walk straight past human traffickers, MS-13, as Susan horrifically stated with her own situation. Susan, I'll never forget your story for the rest of my life, and now you're in my prayers, and your family is. So MS-13, they're traffickers is what they are. You can say a million things about MS-13, but they're traffickers. So the sisters ascend these hills, these mountains, and as I mentioned earlier about Father Bahi, well, they're saints. Saints don't care if they die. That's why they become martyrs. So as long as the sisters are in a state of grace, they're like, yeah, you know what? Lop my head off, whatever. So the sisters have been held up at gunpoint. They've been kidnapped. They've been beaten up. They've been spat upon. But the sisters, maybe it's a supernatural grace. They simply don't care. Why? Because they know they are preemptive workers in saving those that would be trafficked. So the sisters go into these little huts, and it's like there's a little girl in a tomb, like in a grave, and it's almost like the sister raises the lid of the coffin and says, "It's time to come down. We can come down the mountain now." And the poor little girl, whatever country they're in, will say, "Well, sister, I can't. It's too dangerous, and they'll go after my mom." No, no, sweetie, your mom has been praying for us to come up this mountain, and it's time. Well, sister, is it safe? Yes, it's safe. Let's go. So they sort of help the girls out of these so-called tombs, and they walk back down these mountains, and again they split the seams of the traffickers and MS-13 and the murderers and all that, drug runners, and then they'll hop on a bus and they'll travel 13 hours back to Chalco, Mexico. And I'll mention it earlier, these places are they're humble kingdoms of resurrection where the kids are mothered back to health. The wounds are, as Father Bahi could tell you, the wounds are unspeakable. You just don't get into the wounds and say, yeah, we'll pray it away. It demands a scalpel that you go into consistently to get to really the first day that it happened, and then you sort of work the way out of it, and you convince the poor little girl or the poor little boy, no, you're a virgin, you're a princess of God, you're a prince of God, and once you can get to that point, that's when the healing begins. I since now I'm a newbie to this. I feel like I'm a neophyte, but now that I know, I'm more active in writing about trafficking and actually producing videos and speaking about it. I do think one of the things that Father Bayi touched on is very important, and I'll be candid now. I don't know why. I don't know why we don't have thousands upon thousands of Father Bahis. I don't know why. It's been said a few times in this conference to contact your community leaders and political leaders, and of course we need to do that. But I'm going to urge everyone in this conference that's listening right now, to maybe re-engineer the way you think. And I want you to urge your church leaders, your pastor, your rabbi, your bishop, to say, why are you not talking about human trafficking? What am I not understanding, Father? What am I not understanding, Pastor? Why are you reluctant to bring up the greatest evil in the world today? The greatest, let's say, the greatest hidden evil. I think abortion's pretty. It might top it. I don't want to give a hierarchy of evil, but I'm deeply confused why we don't have more Sisters of Mary or more Father Bahis. It doesn't make sense to me. So I don't really care about ecological sin. I don't care about global warming. It doesn't mean anything to me. And excuse me if I offend anyone on this conference, but it means nothing to me, because my head is zeroed in on what is happening to these girls and boys who are demonically abused, and there seems to be an echo chamber. I just don't hear much. So I'm here to urge folks to begin reaching out to their church leaders and educate them. Maybe they don't know. So let's grant them that. Maybe they don't know. In my own church, my own Catholic church, and I'll be candid now, because of past abuses. I'm sorry, Father Bayi, I'll just say this, but because of past abuses, sexual, with priests and young men, I think there might be a reluctancy for the church to take it on, and shame on the church if they are, because they need to break past sort of the stigma and say no more. Matter of fact, we need to do reparation. We need to do reparation for what we've done. And maybe the best form of reparation we can do is step into this mess, this chocolate mess, and really take the fore and be the vanguard, actually be the vanguard to be Christ's witnesses to the greatest evil in the world today. So that's why I'm so heartened. It doesn't surprise me at all. That's why I'm so heartened to hear that Father Bahi is traveling the world. He knows far more than I, and maybe more than many of us, of the manifestation of how bad this is, because he works with these sisters and he sees the girls all the time. The girls adore Father Bahi. I saw it live in concert. I saw the way they adore him. Why? Because he loves them. Why? Because the sisters love them. So he wants to spread this, like this bright hallelujah of saving grounds, Metanoia Manor, and try and build 10, 20, 30 throughout the country. So with that said, I guess what I would like to propose here at the end is this. I don't really know. I don't really know what I can do other than write as a journalist, which I've been doing. and holding up the Sisters of Mary as preemptive workers of bringing of saving the traffic. A lot of the girls and boys have escaped trafficking. But here's the one thing I will say, and here's what the sisters do, and it is brilliant. Once the sisters became informed from Father Dan about the magnitude of the sexual abuse, here's what they did. They incorporated into these boys' towns and girls' towns taekwondo, judo, swimming, boxing, exercises. So not only are they physically equipping these kids for when they have to go back into their villages, but they're doing this. They're saying, okay, here's what you do if you're approached. You swing back your shoulders, you look them in the eye, and you say, I don't fear you anymore. I don't fear you. So they teach the girls psychologically how to take on, because these traffickers in these poor villages, it's inevitable that they will be confronted again. So they're educating the boys and the girls of how to take on the traffickers. They're taking them on. So they're kind of flipping the script. It's the inverse. It used to be the traffickers. Now it's the girls and boys as high school graduates, 18, 19 years old, that go back into the communities. And this is the best thing. These girls who've been mothered back to health by the Sisters of Mary, they're educated, they're loved, they're catechized, they play sports, music. I mean, they're on top of the world. They've been risen from the dead. They're Lazarus, right? They're Lazarus. The sisters saved me. So now they go back into communities and they teach their communities how to beat back the traffickers. They educate their other teenagers, and they specifically look for the younger ones, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old in these communities, and say, here's what you're going to do. I've learned of what to do. So again, we'll go back to what's been emphasized a lot. The Sisters of Mary emphasize education. Not only education, but hey, when you go back, here's what you do. We're going to build you up physically. Obviously, you've been built up spiritually, but also mentally, psychologically, of how to take on these monsters. So education's big. And the last thing before I go is I'd like to, again, I beg you, I beg you, I beg you, please ask your church leaders to get involved. I don't know why it is so quiet. How would Jesus Christ respond were he to come back on earth today and hang out on earth for a little while? How do you think he would respond to human trafficking? What do you think he would do? Well, propose that to your rabbi, your priest, your pope, whatever you have, because I think when they truly get a grip on it and they proclaim it from their pulpits, this little heartbeat's chance to really attack this thing in a persuasive way, it's going to gain some steam when our church leaders really grab hold of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I really appreciate it. We're kind of running out of time, so I have to move on to our next presenter, who is Seth Brooks, who is an alumnus of UNC Pembroke, a veteran of the military, specifically the Army, and founder of Project Sheep. Somebody needs to mute the mic. Someone needs to mute her mic. Thank you very much. Back to Seth. He was born and raised in North Carolina. Somebody needs to mute. Can somebody please mute their mic? Oh, now I've got it. Thank you. Sorry. Sorry about that. For some reason, Seth is muted. Seth, can you see if you can unmute yourself, please? Thank you. Okay. He had a personal relationship with Christ that began in high school. It changed his whole life. After years of praying for guidance, he entered the Army. Within a month, he was shipped to Fort Benning to begin the long journey of becoming a Green Beret. While in the Army, God put a passion on his heart for combating human trafficking. He met others who shared this passion, and within a few months, he formed the nonprofit. Please mute your mics, everyone. The nonprofit called Project Lost Sheep, which continues the motto of the Green Berets, De Oppresso Liber, or to free the oppressed. And he's married, and he has a beautiful wife and 2 kids. And his children are, and his NGO is here in North Carolina. Welcome, Seth Brooks.
Thank you, Professor. It's good to be here. I'm thankful for being a part of this. Let's see if I can go ahead and share this presentation I have.
Thank you, Seth.
Okay, you are all able to see that?
Yep.
Okay. So hey everyone, again, my name is Seth Brooks. I'm one of the founders of Project Lost Sheep. We are a nonprofit organization that is located just outside of Greensboro, North Carolina, but we travel all over the state performing our nonprofit operations. I just want to say thank you again to Professor Pepperosi for having me this year as one of the speakers, and to the other speakers that are in this fight and that volunteered to speak today, and to all of you that are taking the time to attend this very important conference. As you heard today, this is a crime and a problem that is not going away, and we definitely need all the people in the fight that we can get. So just a little bit about my personal story as to why I'm involved and dedicated to ending this crime. As you heard in my bio, my reason for being in this fight directly comes completely from my faith and God's guidance in my life. He is responsible for leading me to the military, where I got the training and experience I received there, and then also a few years later giving me the passion to combat human trafficking, specifically in our state of North Carolina and our country. Around this same time, I met some other individuals that were passionate about getting involved in this fight as well, and therefore Project Lost Sheep was born as I was actually starting Professor Pepperosi's human trafficking course at Pembroke. And she definitely played a big part in the amount of knowledge that I have on the human trafficking industry through that course. Personally, I believe this crime is the most, the worst and most inhumane crime in the world, especially considering its impact on the children all over the world and in our country, and the controlling of someone else's freedom and life. It has the most devastating effects on someone's life in terms of the trauma involved, whether it's physical, emotional, or psychological abuse. The best way that I have heard it described by a victim is as a living death. Which takes me to my next slide. So when we start to talk about some of the effects this crime has on victims, obviously they're pretty devastating effects as we've kind of heard about already today. These are just some of those effects that go into this crime with the victims that are put through it. So you see, obviously you have the abuse I mentioned earlier, and then we have a lot of these victims can form a trauma bond with their abusers and traffickers. And then a big part of it as well is post-traumatic stress disorder. We're seeing that in a lot of victims. That's comparable to veterans of combat and the things that they see in war. So that kind of is a telling sign of how traumatic the experience of a victim can be of human trafficking. And then furthermore, as a parent myself with 2 kids, that makes me even more passionate about this fight, as I feel every parent should be, to not wish this evil upon any daughter or son. And I truly believe that this is a fight that God is with, our nonprofit and other individuals and organizations that are in this fight. This is a fight that He's with us in and behind us in as we try to combat this evil. So as I said, the primary focus of our organization, Project Lost Sheep, is our own state and the backyards of North Carolina. Organizations doing the kind of work that we do is not new and has been happening at least since the 1990s from organizations that we work with and partner with. In my humble opinion, while some law enforcement departments in our state are doing what they can to combat human trafficking, ultimately, throughout the country, I believe law enforcement as a whole is behind the curve in this fight. So that's why I believe we're seeing more veterans and military personnel that are rising up to try to do their part in being able to combat this issue. So talking about just the law enforcement side of things, they don't necessarily have the time or resources, or they could lack statistical data, not to mention training and education. I know we've got several individuals on a part of our organization that have law enforcement backgrounds, and even going back to 2015 with them doing prostitution stings and things like that, human trafficking wasn't even on their mind or a thing that they were thinking about when they were doing prostitution stings and cases like that. And then just because of the nature of human trafficking, you obviously have a lack of reporting, with only 5 to 15% of human trafficking cases ever being discovered and or reported. And then not to mention, in our country today and the climate, law enforcement obviously lacks the resources, funding, and obviously manpower to fulfill patrol positions, let alone positions that would be solely dedicated to combating human trafficking. And considering human trafficking is the second highest crime industry, only to drug trafficking, which because of the reasons I stated just now, with the lack of statistics and cases being reported, I would probably argue that if it hasn't passed drug trafficking, it's pretty close to passing it.
Not yet, though. Not yet. Thankfully, not yet.
But I would, if you just think about how often we hear about drug-related crime compared to human trafficking-related crime, I think that points to the evidence of us just not being where we need to be in this fight currently. So getting into the next little section of this. So what do we do at Project Lost Sheep? So our primary mission at Project Lost Sheep is to use our skills and experience that we have on our team to identify and locate victims of human trafficking. And we do this by working alongside people in the community, law enforcement, and other nonprofits and organizations that are passionate about getting behind this fight. Our team is primarily made up of individuals with law enforcement and or military backgrounds. So we have the experience and training to do the things that we are going out and doing to combat human trafficking. And this includes individuals from special operations teams and SWAT teams and law enforcement. In addition to this, we provide or collaborate with other organizations to provide temporary safe housing, as well as aftercare rehabilitation services. We run a 24/7 hotline for victim emergencies and assistance, as well as for anybody that has tips in North Carolina. Lastly, our mission is to educate potential victims, families, and the general public in order to better prevent trafficking in the first place. So getting into some of the operations side of things, our team, the guys that I have on the team, we operate according to a very thorough set of policies and standard operating procedures. And this ensures that everything we do is done correctly and as safely as possible, which includes everything from planning to interacting with a victim. We do not go out and do anything without having a detailed plan in place and ensuring everybody's on the same page. The location and identification of victims is done by a combination of online investigating and research on websites, social media platforms, and potentially the dark web, as well as physical surveillance and information or tips that we gather from our hotline or from the community. And when applicable, we do coordinate with respective law enforcement departments based off of the location of the case in the state. It is also important to note with our organization that we are 100% volunteer force. The people are part of, our organization are fighting this fight out of the passion that they have to make a difference in the lives of these victims. And, they're doing this all while having full-time jobs, families, and other commitments that they have to attend to. Therefore, with that being said, obviously all the money that gets donated to our organization is going directly straight to our operations, and nobody on our team is compensated in any way for that, for the work that they're doing. While we're relatively new and only been around for about 2 years, and we are continuing to build out our organization, and we tend to stay out of the public eye with the work that we're doing, but we've thankfully been able to accomplish some pretty good things. Specifically last year, we conducted several operations. Amongst these operations that we conducted, we coordinated with another organization on a case that involved a drug trafficking pedophile in our state. With that specific case, we handed that off to the respective law enforcement department for them to take further action. And another notable case that we had last year, there was a case in another county last year where a family reached out to us about with their kid that had gone missing, and law enforcement had already been called and been to the scene, and had been unable to locate the minor, even with a police dog on hand. Our team was called, and within an hour of us being on scene, we were able to locate the kid prior to an Amber Alert being issued. So that was, an extreme blessing from God, and we're thankful for the work that we were able to do and accomplish last year. When we start to talk about this year and some of the things that we currently have going on, we have several open cases on potential traffickers as well as pedophiles in our state. We're continuing our search online and through physical surveillance for victims of human trafficking, whether it's sex or labor. And we're always continuing to expand our network as far as organizations and individuals we're partnered with in this fight. Some of the other big things we're working on is getting into our local school systems to provide some in-person trainings, specifically for teachers and staff. That way they'll be better able to identify victims in the classrooms. And we're also trying to do something similar to that fashion with the local foster system as well. Because we know as with dealing with the foster system, you have about, as far as sex trafficking victims, 80% of those victims at some point or another were involved with the foster system. In addition to that, as I said, our organization believes a lot in the concept of teamwork. We're always looking to connect with, others in this fight. And we strongly believe, as Mr. Wolf said earlier, in the teamwork and working together as one unit to actively combat this problem in our state. Sharing the information, connections, and skill sets that we bring to the fight to better combat this evil. There's no need, for our organization to recreate what other organizations are already good at doing. So we just focus on what we're good at doing, and then partner with all the others that are in other facets of this fight in regards to aftercare, rehabilitation, or whatever it may be, because we believe, as I say, we can do a lot more together as a unit than by everyone doing their own thing. So getting into next, what we can all do in this fight. This obviously is a big issue. It needs to be attacked from every element, in my opinion, to include everything from the victims, the traffickers, as well as the customers involved. As a Christian, I believe one of the most important things you can do is to pray for these victims, the potential victims, customers, traffickers, and people that are in this fight. And obviously, the second most important thing I believe you can do, as you are right now during this conference, is to educate yourself and others, and be able to understand the facts and realities of the human trafficking industry. Just one example would be prostitution and pornography. You know, most of the people that are involved in prostitution and pornography, those are victims of sex trafficking. Or if you, you know, talking about labor trafficking, some of the everyday products that we use, such as cell phones or, you know, consumer goods, those are products of labor trafficking. Therefore, you know, if you're a customer of these items, obviously that we're part of the problem of human trafficking. So getting more into what we can do, if you are a parent, this kind of goes, you know, towards you, or if you deal with kids in any type of capacity. Make sure your kids, or most importantly, know that they're loved, have their needs provided for, and you are able to keep a look on, you know, their internet activities as well as social media and things like that to make sure they're not interacting with anybody unsafe or that they shouldn't be talking to, amongst these other list of items here on this slide. But, you know, making sure that their needs are accounted for and that you're telling them you're proud of them and that you love them, it goes a long way in preventing further victims of trafficking. I want to quickly just take some time to go over the signs of a potential trafficking victim, so we can all have this knowledge if you don't already. This is important to educate yourself on. So these are just a few of the signs of victims. If you look at their appearance, it might be skimpy or inappropriate for the weather. That goes for labor or sex trafficking. They could have nails and hair done professionally. A big thing for sex trafficking itself, you'll have the tattoos, which often are brands of traffickers to show ownership to a specific trafficker. You also obviously have physical trauma that can be visible to see. Changes in pattern over a short time can be a sudden change in wardrobe or something out of the ordinary. In addition to that, as we've heard today, you can have the being controlled by someone else, such as a boyfriend or a person nearby that's most likely older than the victim. You also come into lying or manipulation by the victims. They'll lie about their age, or they'll have rehearsed responses to individuals' questions. They'll have low self-esteem. A lot of times they'll be antisocial. They'll avoid eye contact and not socialize normally with others. A lot of times they won't see themselves as victims. That gets into more of the psychology of the crime, as well as that trauma bond that they form with traffickers. A lot of times they can be aggressive or angered quickly, especially if confronted with someone that's actually concerned about their well-being or trying to make sure they're okay. And then obviously cell phones, multiple cell phones, or inappropriate material with social media platforms and profiles. And then take some time to look at, you know, their habits and patterns, especially if you're, you know, a teacher or someone that's around kids often. Their sleep cycle, or if grades start to drop, tired in school, or if they start to miss, you know, days of school periodically. Furthermore, you have drug addiction, obviously, as one of the signs of a victim. A lot of times, once a victim is recruited, specifically into sex trafficking, that this drug addiction can be forced on them, and then they become addicted from that. They'll have a lack of health care. A lot of times they'll have dental issues. They can be over-sexualized. And then some other last few signs, there can be no motivation, breakdown of trust towards men and authority, specifically law enforcement. And then looking at their social group, they could have bad influencers or involvement with gang activity or gang members. Then if we get into the more of the recruitment side of things and looking at the vulnerabilities of these victims, you need to be able to educate yourself on what we've kind of talked about with what makes these victims vulnerable in the first place. Whether that's a physical well-being need that's not being met, or like I said earlier, with parenting, a lack of love in the home life, or another reason, such as these on the screen, can be poverty, abuse at home, homelessness, addiction. We talked about the foster system, and this slide just includes some of the statistics that go into this. But one of the main points that I want to hit home with this, which has kind of been covered a little bit, but this is really important, and I think a really good point. I believe most importantly, that each of us, we can do an extraordinary amount of good work if we just take the time to reach out to these vulnerable populations before someone with bad intentions reaches out to them in the form of a trafficker. If we would just be proactive in seeking out these individuals and meeting these needs before a trafficker does, it could go a long way in preventing further victims of this crime. Getting into if you are able to identify, well, this next slide goes over Maslow's hierarchy of needs that get into meeting the needs of victims. This is what we can beat traffickers to the point on a lot of these things. So what you can do further, one person with courage is a majority in most situations. If you see something, say something. If you're in a capacity with your occupation, such as hospitals or law enforcement, foster system, anything like that, you might be more apt to coming across a victim of human trafficking. So knowing those signs. If you are able to identify a victim, safely get as much information as you can in regards to the victim and the situation. But I would say try to avoid approaching them unless you are in one of those occupations where they have come to you directly already. And then from there, have a good contact already saved on your phone for who you can reach out to in different situations, whether that's law enforcement, social services, or a local organization or nonprofit, to let them know about the situation at hand. If you are someone that is more passionate, that's passionate about getting more involved in this fight, then take a look at the organizations and nonprofits around you and the work that they're actively involved in, and reach out to them and see how you can best help them and what they currently have going on in the community. But I would caution, if you are looking to get into combating this crime in whatever fashion, just be aware of the evil that comes with combating this crime. There are things that you can't unsee or unhear as you start to get more involved in this fight when it comes to dealing with victims and what they've had to go through and the trauma that they've faced. But with that being said, there are so many areas in this fight, from outreach to prevention to aftercare and new legislation, that we can all come together and collectively fight to help combat human trafficking. If you are someone that's looking to get more involved in this fight, then I promise there's a place where you can be used in this fight. There's plenty of organizations and nonprofits in this fight where you can actively be a positive help to them in their fight. So if just to wrap this up a little bit, if you are someone, part of this conference, that is really hearing about this enormous issue and problem for the first time, or maybe truly understanding it, I will leave you with this last question. Now you know, what will you do?
Thank you so much, Seth. And I'm so proud that several of my students, Susan, Seth, and some others, have gotten involved in the fight against human trafficking. Thank you so much. I've shared his website, projectlostsheep.org, with you. And we're going now to move to our next speaker, Michelle Bright, who is a UNC Chapel Hill alumnus, who she co-authored a report She co-authored a report in 2023, right, Michelle? 2023.
Yes.
She graduated from UNC Chapel Hill in December. She had a double major in public policy, political science, supplemented by a minor in data science. She's currently working full-time for the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center and will be attending the University of Pittsburgh School of Public Health in this coming fall of 2024. She'll get a master's of health administration. She is eager to become a lawyer. I don't know why. As a lawyer, I don't know why, but that's wonderful, Michelle. She's eager to get her law degree afterwards with the hopes to impact and advocate for healthcare at a federal level, which is such a laudable thing to do. She has a deep passion for violence prevention and survivor advocacy. She worked for the university's Violence and Prevention Advocacy Department, volunteered at a local rape crisis center, and led the Denim Day Carolina campaign. She has a steadfast commitment to victim advocacy, survivor advocacy, as she continues to discover her future. Welcome, Michelle Bright.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. I'm going to share my screen for my presentation. And you can see it?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, great. So before we get into it, I wanted to give a little bit of background for why I chose to get involved in the fight against human trafficking and how I came to co-author this paper. And so as I'd been working in violence prevention for a little over 2 years, when the Sound of Freedom movie came out, I was excited to watch it. I wanted to know more about this aspect of violence. And so I saw it. It was monumental for me. It was a very powerful movie. And it was kind of in the back of my mind as something that I wanted to get involved in and didn't really know how. I didn't know where I could do something. And so then I walked into my capstone class, my last semester at UNC last year. And the way that this is run at UNC, the capstone course, is that they partner students with organizations. The organization chooses the topic, and the student takes it and runs with it. And so when I saw that human trafficking was a topic, I knew that that was the project that I wanted to do, and I wanted to incorporate my previous work experience in violence prevention on campus and at the Rape Crisis Center to see if I could find something valuable to help with the fight against human trafficking. And so I then co-authored this report with 4 other students and this analysis. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about my policy recommendation today, which is a state-mandated prevention education model. And so we identified both 4 pillars and 4 challenges to the implementation of a state-mandated prevention education model. So before we get into the prevention education, I wanted to give a little bit of background about our research. So we started by using existing academic literature to identify the major causes, effects, and indicators of human trafficking. And then we used that in combination with census data to create an interactive risk index map. So we used things like the percentage of females, the percentage of minorities, socioeconomic status, and created a scale of 10 factors to determine the risk of each county in North Carolina. So that was the first part, creating this interactive website. And then the second part was conducting a series of interviews with stakeholders in North Carolina and within government to address what they thought a prevention education model would look like and challenges to why that doesn't exist currently. So with that, and with the information from the interviews, we then created the model that I am going to present to you guys today. So first, what is prevention education? The Department of Education identified that education is and will always be the great equalizer in America. However, equal education extends beyond equal treatment regardless of demographic factors. It includes an attention to the physical and psychological safety of students within these institutions. And this is protected under Title IX policy. And so more importantly, education serves as both prevention and intervention by providing children with language and knowledge. Knowledge is power to them. This is not intuitive at such a young age. And so this is giving them the confidence to disclose and who to disclose to. And so educators are inherently in a position of influential leadership and first response. And so with this position, they are held accountable for the formation of children beyond just academic rigor, because from ages 4 to at a minimum 18, students are or children are required to be in academic institutions, and most continue until the age of 22 in higher education. And so this is the access point for teaching a culture of safety rather than a culture of violence. And so prevention education, by definition, is a comprehensive model addressing the root causes of interpersonal violence, sexual assault, relationship violence, and stalking. Prevention strategies are intended to target 3 levels: the individual, the community, and external societal factors, which replicates a public health model: primary, secondary, and tertiary factors that influence and are influenced by violence and human trafficking. And so the 4 pillars that we identified are trauma-informed care, evidence-based practices, inclusivity, and alignment with a public health model. And so prevention education emphasizes safety, trustworthiness, transparency, collaboration, and choice. And so we chose these pillars to reflect these values. So first we'll get into trauma-informed care and what does this look like in prevention education. So youth and young adults at all levels of education, as many of the speakers today have said, are exposed and susceptible to all types of trauma, both at home and at school. There's not a safe space, right? And so about 70% of adults report undergoing a traumatic experience before the age of 16. And it is scientifically proven that trauma is a wound to the brain, that there is a change in the brain, and this surfaces very differently by individual, and it can be seen through unpredictable emotions or the inability to be alone, or the polar opposite, complete isolation from everybody. And so this inherently impacts academic achievements. There are academic impacts from experiencing trauma. And so this requires a shift in the educator's perspective of what it might mean to be a disruptive student. And so I'm sure we all know very well the struggles of being in school, whether that be you remembering what it was like for yourself or watching your child experience that, especially in middle school and high school, and all of those changes and battles. And so regardless of any pre-existing trauma, children are dealing with a lot of emotions that they are just now learning how to deal with, right? So the principle of the trauma-informed approach is acknowledging that the experience of trauma is something that was done to the individual rather than something they did to themselves, that this is something that they could not keep from happening. So asking what happened rather than what is wrong with you. And so the main point of being trauma informed is rooted in the assumption that trauma can happen to anybody, that every child or adult could have a history of trauma, and responding with that lens, emphasizing strength, healing, and resistance rather than an abnormality in the brain that needs to be fixed. So the second pillar is evidence-based practices, and this is defined by the conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence in making decisions about the care of individuals. So these strategies were originally implemented in the healthcare field, but have since developed across disciplines. So when it reached the educational sector, it prompted the addition of context as a primary layer in decision making. And so what does context mean? That's understanding how the students' social and biological culture and experiences factors into the teacher's implementation of their lessons and programs, and how that should change the lessons and programs and how they are implemented. And so looking now at the teacher selection with evidence-based practices, there are profound implications in the students' well-being, education, and future based off of their educator. And so despite the significant implications of who the teacher is and how those students respond to that, there has been less scrutiny placed on teacher selection than many other professional sectors like healthcare or business, that teacher selection isn't necessarily a priority with their training and what they require to be an educator, specifically in prevention education. And so considering the long-term impact, evidence-based practices should be in consideration when selecting the teacher as well as the implementation of their lessons and programs. Third is inclusivity. And so to achieve a truly inclusive educational environment, sensitivity is and should be a priority. So this kind of goes back to the trauma-informed care, that when we are looking at a prevention education model, being aware of the different vulnerabilities of different groups, including disadvantaged groups, and how the content must be tailored to that and to that population. And so the concept of equitable access must extend beyond just a conventional boundary to include those with disabilities or those who may not speak English as their first language. And so a very important aspect of the inclusivity pillar is that being sensitive to these differences in demographics is creating an environment where every student is not just educated, but empowered with who they are. And then finally, the final pillar is alignment with a public health model. So the framework of a public health model has 3 levels: primary, secondary, and tertiary factors. Primary factors emphasize the individual, so the education and strategies that we are giving them, including the specific skills to recognize and respond to instances of violence. Secondary factors address the community, so identifying how they can engage with the individual and identifying indirect causes of violence. And then finally, tertiary factors are addressing society, so advocating for policies to address systemic issues that contribute and catalyze to violence and human trafficking. And so a prevention education model ideally would be a testament to the power of a holistic, community-driven public health model. And so in addition, I said that we had identified challenges to prevention education, and we wanted to be preemptive in this effort because, of course, with every policy recommendation, there are going to be barriers, especially with something as large as a state-mandated prevention education program. So in North Carolina, we identified the current political climate, parents and guardians, reflectiveness of demographics, and funding as 4 major barriers to the implementation of a prevention education model. So first, the political climate. It is well known across North Carolina as well as the nation that the political climate is extremely polarized and increasingly so. And so more specifically, looking at the political parties within the United States, they differ significantly in what constitutes governmental versus parental jurisdiction. And this is largely prevalent in the educational sector. And so with the ever-changing political environment alternating between different leadership, Democratic and Republican, there tends to be intermediate policy changes rather than comprehensive reforms. And so this instability and division within leadership then catalyzes a community lack of trust in government and an underdeveloped political awareness and the correlations between the two. And so there's this intuitive snowball effect of division within leadership, which then leads to division within the community, which then leads to a lack of care between individuals where violence then occurs. And so as an example, and another challenge that we ran into was parents and guardians. And so Senate Bill 49 was recently passed about 6 months ago in August of 2023. And it is also known as the Parents' Bill of Rights. And so I wanted to acknowledge that this bill does align with FERPA and HIPAA regulations, which means that academic institutions need to receive consent, formal consent, before proceeding with any medical treatment, inform parents about student physical and mental health, as well as communicating the child's academic standing and achievements. And so, however, this bill additionally introduces the concept of parental discretion to enroll their child in prevention education courses. And so this discretion simultaneously removes most instruction, if not all, from K through 4th grade. And so while it does not explicitly state this removal, and states that prevention education language is not appropriate for the ages that are within kindergarten through 4th grade. And so it's removing it from the younger grades and very much limiting it in the older grades. And so one note that I wanted to point out about this this language is that the bill requires parents to opt in to prevention education rather than opt out of. And so this difference, I think, implies that the government does not find it important enough to mandate, right? To make it, it's an exception rather than the norm or a rule. And so that's an additional barrier that parents then have to choose and say, okay, well, the government is not mandating it, so why would I enroll my child in prevention education? And so despite the importance of violence and safety as public health concerns, this parental discretion places a child in the realm of individual opinions and the opinions of their parent, which is not always a safe place to be, rather than a collective societal responsibility. The third challenge that we wanted to recognize was reflectiveness of demographics. And so breaking it down by county in North Carolina, the demographics are very, very different, whether that be a larger population of females or a larger population of minorities. And an important aspect of prevention education in preparing the child is being able to provide them the specific tools that they will need to respond to violence. And that changes by who the child is as a person. And so achieving this reflection of the state mandated prevention education model we recommended introduces a critical and constantly evolving challenge as new classes of students enter each school. You're receiving a new population of students within the class with different demographic factors. And so the content of prevention education needs to be tailored to who that class is. And so achieving this reflection requires a transformative approach from the teachers to be able to engage with who they are as a person and the battles that they face and who the child is. And so most important with this challenge, more so than changing an approach to the children, it's a reform in teacher education. And this is part of the pillars that I had mentioned with evidence-based practices and preparing the teacher to teach prevention education. And then finally, funding as a challenge. Current prevention education is created and delivered by non-governmental organizations where this is their primary concern, their primary charism, all their thought is placed into this one subject. On the other hand, government holds a wide range of responsibilities that reach beyond just a single issue, just human trafficking. And so because of this, human trafficking tends to lack priority status at a federal level. And this might not be intentional. It's because there's a competition for what are finite resources. And this issue is then exacerbated by the lack of collective concern and changing political agendas. And so additionally, within the United States, educational institutions are continuously allocated unequal and minimal resources, which is then inherently limiting the funding to prevention education within schools and the scope of prevention education. So in navigating this challenge, we recommend understanding the subjectivity of what quote unquote adequate resources for an educational institution means and how that might change based on the demographics of a county, whether that be a low income area might need more funding to put this in place. And so just being aware of that when we're looking at responding to these challenges. So I will say this one more time. This also includes access to high quality teachers trained in preventative work. And that is a huge and crucial component to delivering effective prevention education. And so with that, I am a huge advocate of this and am looking forward to hopefully seeing something change at a federal level in the future for prevention education. But that is my research project. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And Bill Wolf, I'd like you to share your PowerPoint and your document with Anti-Trafficking International. I will send you his email contact. Thank you. Oh, we only have a few more minutes left. Actually,
Thank you so
a little
much.
over time. I'm so proud of you too, Michelle, and your parents. I'm so proud. Our last speaker is Jennifer Musumeci, who is on the Advisory Council for Street Grace. She's a subject matter expert in trafficking. She is a human services and social services professional specializing, sadly, in the tough area, sex trafficking. She brings extensive professional, educational, and lived experience background to her direct services, community outreach, prevention, and education, and advocacy roles. She serves as a co-leader of the Street Grace Survivor Advisory Council. Street Grace is an NGO committed to ending the demand for commercial sexual exploitation, and it also supports survivors and victims through direct care advocacy community program through the Southeast region of the United States that's based in Georgia. She served with Street Grace Mentor Program Coordinator at the Hope Specialty Court within Chatham County Department of Juvenile Justice in Savannah, Georgia, and she recently served as a leader for the Theros Place facility on its design for a new residence for commercially sexually exploited girls and females. She's got a Master's of Science in Human Development from the University of Rochester, a graduate certificate in Addictions and Counseling from UNC Pembroke, and she'll begin our MSW, Master of Social Work program this fall. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. I'm very aware of the time, so I was here. Largely, I met Judith a few weeks ago as I was getting ready to enroll for classes, and I was asked to come in here and provide some introductory information about me, about Street Grace. So I'm going to keep this brief for all of us because we've covered so much wonderful information already.
Wonderful.
I'm going to share my screen. Where's my PowerPoint? Well, I am unable to get the PowerPoint to respond. So you know what? I'll speak to what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about Street Grace, and I am actually also going to share with you that I am a survivor of childhood sex trafficking. My particular situation involved familial trafficking. So I fit into some of the statistics that Bill Wolf was speaking about earlier in our presentation and earlier in our conference. So for me, everything began prior to the age of 5, and the age of exit for me was closer to the time that that we were talking about. The age of entry was for many other girls, which was 14 to 16 years old. I am here today really to talk about hope and about what happens when we stay the course and do this work, and what we can actually do together as a group to keep us all going in this fight. That survivors do survive, they do get through the other side, and there is hope, and they can rebuild their lives. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort from all of us throughout that process, not only in prevention and education, but also in response through aftercare. So to answer well, let me start by telling you a little bit more about Street Grace. So Street Grace is a not-for-profit organization that is committed to demand reduction and ending human trafficking for the commercial sexual exploitation of children specifically. And a lot of my work that I have done with them as a consultant is related to that, specifically to children. However, the Survivor Advisory Council, which is a council at Street Grace that supports all of the work that Street Grace is doing and trains survivors to go out as advisors as well as advocates, not only for Street Grace, but in community across 4 distinct pillars of services that Street Grace offers and that we work on in the community, which is prevention, protection, policy, and pursuit. So some of the same P's, but not all of the same P's. And what we do on the Survivor Advisory Council is we actually actively engage with all of the initiatives, efforts, and projects that Street Grace is involved with across those 4 areas: prevention, protection, policy, and pursuit. And then we also do this kind of work out in the community. And we get out and work with we're in several states, and we have board members who are even greater than the state Street Grace is in. So we do a lot of policy work. We do a lot of survivor-led advising on prevention projects, developments of curriculums, and similar. We also are actively engaged in pursuit right now in helping to advise and advocate for Street Grace's development of AI tools to work with the online safety component of what's going on with the commercial sexual exploitation of children. And I'm giving you very 30,000-foot view explanations here. I'm hoping to be able, as time goes on, and I'm with University of North Carolina at Pembroke, to come back or engage with some of the organizations separately or some of you individually as well and get in a lot more detail. To really speak to the what can we do to end human trafficking, the three areas that the three things that I focused on were compassion, discernment, and collective wisdom and action. And I wanted to speak personally. I knew there was going to be a lot of data given today, so I decided not to put any data and references in my report and in my slides. So I'm speaking about these three areas from my personal experience as a survivor, as well as someone who is boots to the ground in the field. And I've already heard, one of my points under compassion was TBRI. I heard Father Behe already mention that they're using TBRI with his organization. And this is TBRI is something that I learned with Hope Corps and in the work I was doing in Savannah, Georgia. So for me, one of the most important things that we can do to end human trafficking is to look at the need, the situation with a tremendous amount of compassion. For me, Covenant House, when I was in the midst of figuring a way out of my situation, I actually, at the same time I was in it, through a school project, began to volunteer with Covenant House. And at that time, Covenant House was serving males, specifically males who were being trafficked, who were trafficking themselves, and were also highly involved in most cases homelessness and addictive use disorders. So I learned out of the gate that trafficking, even though I didn't understand what was going on with me, but I learned about trafficking from the perspective of it's not just even about females. It's also about males. It's about transgender communities. It's about all different socioeconomic backgrounds, all different types of educational backgrounds. I also had to learn, and this is something I experienced and I can't emphasize enough, and I heard brought up by others here, is how difficult it is to get out of this life, and recidivism, and staying, keep going back. I hear a lot of talk about survivors who stay in it and keep going back. So having a compassion for the challenge to overcome the lifestyle, being victimized, being in this particular very complex problem of human trafficking, or being in commercial sexual exploitation. Again, compassion for all, because human trafficking is affecting all of us, all different classes, all different races, all different ethnicities, all different backgrounds, and all different genders. So it's really important to have compassion when we look at who is being, who is not only who is potentially being trafficked, but when we talk about prevention, we need to really be comprehensive and holistic in how we look at the prevention. In terms of discernment, what I was going to speak to, and I'm again going to roll it up very high level, was so discernment as a spiritual practice, but I was going to talk about it a little bit as a secular practice. Really, one of the things that we can do if we think about how we can all end it is to try to understand what path can I take? Where are my skills? Where are my strengths? Where are my interests? Where are my comfort levels? What's in my home that can be done on my phone and my social media accounts, all the way out to what is available in my community, what's going on in my government, what's going on in my schools and churches. So for me, discernment has been a process of understanding myself as a survivor, what it is that I'm compelled to do. And that changes and grows with time. But what is it that I'm compelled to do? What am I being called to? And also, where is it that I can really use my strengths, my current strengths, as well as potentially continue to evolve and grow. And I mentioned Covenant House already, and talking about something that I learned was that was an aha moment for me, was that this is males and females experiencing human trafficking, and it's not just a female problem as I had thought. But one of the cases that has kept me awake, because I've done a lot of work in the field mentoring and working with youth who are actively engaged in trafficking or at high risk, was really being clear on victim versus who the victim is. There are many cases where we have youth who are being victimized by people who have been victimized and others who have been victimized in their lives, or youth who are being charged with criminal offenses related to them as traffickers when they are being coerced by their situations to recruit friends or to bring in other people. So for me, one of the cases, I don't know how many of you who work in this field have had this case that's kept you up at night. For me, it was one of the cases I was working on where an offender in the life of one of the youth I was working with who was in the treatment program, he himself had been trafficked and it had not been dealt with. He had not had access to community. He had, like we're talking about here, did not have the resources he needed. And it's a case of, there's a lot of specifics around it, which I don't have time to get into, but I have not been able to basically go to bed at night over it because I keep thinking about how he became what had been done to him. So for me, that, and specifically this particular individual is gang involved and also involved in a lot of addictive use disorders, which are two areas that I'm studying specifically with a social work degree. So I, in my discernment process, have found the path that I want to continue to serve working with, really helping those who are in the life and in any of the preventative or resiliency building work that I do to really look at those realities that very frequently those who've been victimized can become the person who perpetrates. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on was the importance of, especially with discernment, was the collective power of collective wisdom and collective action. That, you know, I alone can't do it, but I can't do it. I alone have to do it, but I can't do it alone. And for me, this is really critical. And we talked a lot about this throughout this entire conference, and looking at where can I go and what can I do. And one thing that for me, being on the Survivor Advisory Council has become fundamental in my own evolution in this field and in my own healing process is how much I have my skill sets and interests in combination and my wisdom in combination with others in an organization are really what brings the power behind the effect of change. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of finding communities with collective wisdom and collective experience, looking at prevention programming, looking at crisis response, law enforcement training, and any of the ways that you may be looking to get directly involved through the lens of doing it with others and being in communities where there is a certain amount of individual unlearning for collective learning, and where everybody is bringing a skill set to the table, and through all of the shared wisdom and participating in events like this, we really can find the diverse set of solutions that we need, as well as the diverse set of skills and multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary skills that we need and resources. So for me, it takes the collective wisdom and the collective action following discernment and compassion to really address how to tackle the complexities of the human trafficking umbrella, as I call it. And I blasted through that very quickly. So I hope there's
You're from New
opportunity.
Jersey, of course. You talk fast like I do.
I knew I had like about, it was 10 after, I had about 10 minutes. So
thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer, most importantly, though, thank you, and Susan especially, for sharing your history. That you are a survivor of familial sex trafficking. Thank you for sharing that with my audience, because that's who we learn the most from, people like you and Susan. Thank you so much for being a part of this at the last minute. I'm so glad I met you. So I'm just going to end very briefly to thank you all for attending. All of you will be sent a certificate of attendance. I'm actually going to move it to 4 hours since we went over time. And I'm going to send you a recording. So if you need to, see any part of it that you missed, it'll be processed. It takes a couple of days to process and get edited by my IT staff. And I'm so thankful for so many of you showing up. I think we're close to 400. Thank you. Somebody from New Jersey is on here. Thank you again for really wanting to learn about human trafficking. Next year, our conference will probably focus on labor trafficking. And I'm just going to share again the PowerPoint. So if there's any of the organizations that you would really like to get a hold of and learn more about, they're all listed here. So in all of these organizations, you can get in touch with our speakers. So we have Anti-Trafficking International at PreventHT or humantrafficking.org. We have Metanoia Manor, that was Father Bahi. I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name, Father. I should have asked. At metanoia.inc. metanoia-inc.org. World Villages was Kevin's talk, worldvillages.org. Project Lost Sheep, which was Seth's talk, projectlostsheep.org. And Jennifer's talk, streetgrace.org. And remember, look for those fair trade symbols and download that Sweat and Toil app and buy fair trade. So thank you so much for attending. I'm so happy that it was such a success and you all kind of hung in there. A lot of times people drop off, but most people didn't drop off. They got back, they stayed on the whole time. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We'll see you next year, okay? Thank you.